Chapter 1. The locked diary, drawer a hush, fell over the drawing-room of Blackwood Manor as the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7. Outside, summer's last light waned behind heavy storm clouds, their grey undersides roiling like troubled seas. Inside, a small circle of guests stood rigid with surprised and alarm at the sight that confronted them. The prone figure of Lady Millicent Blackwood, her eyes wide with shock, a single pearl-handled dagger pinned through the heavy mahogany drawer of her private writing desk. It was a discovery most peculiar, for though the blade had found its rest in the polished wood of her locked diary drawer, there was not a drop of blood on the ornate inlay or Lady Millicent's embroidered dressing gown, and yet the air itself seemed heavy with menace, as if the walls of the room, satin-lined and scented with lavender, had heard secrets. They could no longer contain Lady Millicent's cousin. The Honourable Geraldine Faraday was the first to recover her composure. Clutching her lace handkerchief, she bent over the writing desk and pressed a trembling hand to her heart. "Good heavens," she whispered to the assembled company. Who could have done this? At her elbow stood Mr. Edward Carrington, a business associate of the Blackwood family. He was a tall man with keen grey eyes, his crisp morning coat now askew, a silver watch dangling from its chain. "A most singular threat," he muttered, inspecting the dagger with a practised eye. "Miss Blackwood is unhurt, yet the intent was clear." From the doorway came the measured footsteps of Colonel Archibald Hastings, retired Indian Army and longtime friend of the family. He pushed aside the crimson silk curtains to reveal a storm-lashed garden beyond, then turned back. If it were intended as mere intimidation, he remarked in his genteel tone, one might have left a note. Yet no paper or cryptic message accompanies this demonstration. A soft voice from the corner of the room drew their attention. Hercule Poirot, resplendent in a midnight blue frock coat, stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His waxed moustaches curled like twin question marks, and his dark eyes, bright as polished jet, darted from the dagger to the drawer's subtle keyhole. He regarded Lady Millicent, seated upright and pale but composed, with an expression of calm curiosity. Rather than shock, "Madame," he said gently, "vous n'avez pas peur." Lady Millicent managed a faint smile. "Mais non, Monsieur Poirot, I would not wish to scream in front of guests." Poirot inclined his head. "'Tis been. Then we shall proceed as though this were but a puzzle to be solved." He approached the desk, his gait light and deliberate. With a finger, he traced the polished grain of the drawer front, mindful of the pearl handle's subtle scratches. "Observe," he murmured to Hastings, "the point of entry is exact. See how the dagger enters at a slight angle from above. The assailant must have possessed both strength and dexterity, unafraid of the risk." Hastings frowned. To plunge a dagger into wood while risking wounding the lady, surely a bold stroke. "Mais oui," Poirot agreed, "or a desperate one." He crouched to examine the lock. This mechanism is no simple spring lock. It requires a delicate key shaped to 4 tiny tumblers. Only someone with knowledge of the desk or access to the key could have committed this act. Geraldine. Faraday stepped forward. The key was kept on Lady Millicent's person at all times. "I saw it chained inside her reticule this morning." "Ah," said Poirot, straightening. "Then our suspect is limited to those who either borrowed the key, observed its shape, or possessed some alternative means." He tapped his chin. "But why threaten by damaging the drawer rather than stealing its contents outright?" A low rumble of thunder punctuated the question. Through the tall windows, lightning illuminated the dear faces of the guests. Lord Alistair Blackwood, the victim's austere uncle, Miss Penelope Sterling, the Blackwood family governess, and Mr. Lucian Devereux, a visiting author renowned for his scandalous society novels. Each bore a look of stupefied intrigue, yet in their eyes Poirot sensed something more, an undercurrent of fear, perhaps even guilt. Lady Millicent rose unsteadily and clutched the polished edge of the desk. "My diary, my secrets," she began, voice trembling. "Someone must have wanted me to know they could reach whatever I held most dear." Lord Alistair, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier's glow, cleared his throat. "This is a family matter. I suggest we summon the local constable and have this weapon removed." Poirot raised a slender hand. Nan, we must first understand the mind behind this action. For the truth lies not in the weapon itself, but in the motive that guided it." He turned to each in turn, his manner inscrutable yet compelling. "Who among you has cause to fear the revelations within Lady Millicent's diary? Who among you might dread the knowledge it contains?" No one spoke for a heartbeat. Then Miss Sterling, the governess, swallowed and said, "Certainly not I. My affairs are most pedestrian, but perhaps not irrelevant," Poirot replied softly. "A governess often observes truths that others overlook. Madame, did you write of anything scandalous in these past weeks?" Lady Millicent glanced at the dagger. "I confess, I chronicled matters of the heart, of a nature I had thought private." She drew a deep breath. "I mentioned a visitor, a gentleman whose presence I have kept secret." A collective murmur passed through the room. Lucian Devereux's lips curled in a slight smile. Ah, the perils of concealed romance. Lord Alistair's voice was grim. This is hardly the time for jests, Mr. Devereux." Poirot held up a hand to silence them. "On the contrary, Monsieur, jests can conceal truths." He paced slowly, tapping the toe of his patent leather shoe. "This diary was a vault of confidences. To threaten it is to threaten the person who wrote it." He paused by the window, where a flash of lightning carved his silhouette upon the rain-streaked glass. "And if the diary falls into wrong hands, reputations and lives could be destroyed." Thunder rolled again, as if the storm itself approved the gravity of his words. "Tonight," Poirot concluded, "we shall not seek to remove the dagger, nor call the authorities. First, we must learn who among us perceived Lady Millicent's secret as danger rather than romance." He turned to Hastings. "Mon cher ami, fetch me the reticule in which the diary key was kept." Hastings complied, retrieving the delicate leather bag from Lady Millicent's trembling hand. Poirot unzipped it and, with the utmost care, withdrew a slender silver key. He held it before him like a jeweller examining a gem. "See," he murmured, "the key bears the insignia of Blackwood Manor. Only one copy exists." His gaze swept the assembled circle. "One of you has betrayed trust, believing that knowledge can be wielded like a dagger, and that mise amis is our first clue." From the cresting of the storm outside to the sudden stillness within Blackwood Manor, an invisible tension thrummed through the room. A puzzle lay before Hercule Poirot, not merely in wood and metal, but in the hidden chambers of the human heart. And with that, the stage was set for an investigation that would test every subtlety of the detective's famed Little Grey. Cells. Chapter 2. The first clues the following morning. A persistent drizzle fell over Blackwood Manor, turning the gravel drive to a soft slurry of mud and leaves. Colonel Hastings, ever courteous, insisted on greeting the local magistrate, Inspector Lewis of Wessex Constabulary, who arrived promptly at 10 o'clock. Though Hastings welcomed him with tea, it was Poirot who directed the proceedings with meticulous precision. Inspector Lewis surveyed the room where the dagger still protruded from the locked diary drawer. He frowned. Unusual to leave the weapon in place, he observed. One would think the perpetrator would retrieve it or at least remove it to avoid detection. Poirot nodded. Ah, but monsieur, the dagger is part of the message. Its presence speaks more loudly than its absence. Lewis raised an eyebrow. A message, indeed, Poirot replied. Consider the significance of leaving one's mark upon the very object one wishes to conceal. He tapped the desk gently, careful not to disturb the blade. Now, let us examine the scene as though we were the assailant and learn what it reveals. First, the inspector walked Poirot through the movements of each guest as they had described them that evening. Lady Millicent had retired to her dressing room at 7:30, requesting privacy to unburden her mind in her diary. At 8, Geraldine Faraday had brought her a tray of tea and pastries, finding the door ajar and the dagger in situ. Thomas, the butler, claimed he had been polishing silver in the adjacent saloon, oblivious to noise beyond the landing. No one reported hearing any cry or scuffle. Observe, Poirot said, gesturing to the threshold of the room. No disturbance of the carpet, yet the dagger penetrates cleanly through the wood. This suggests that it was applied with quiet deliberation. Lewis crouched to inspect the floor. I see what you mean, no telltale marks where someone might have dug in their heel for leverage. Precisely, Poirot smiled. Our assailant was neither in haste nor clumsy. They knew exactly where to strike and were confident in their skill. Inspector Lewis nodded thoughtfully and moved toward the desk. There is also the matter of the desk's contents. Lady Millicent's writing implements remain undisturbed, but the lock itself exhibits faint scratch marks around the keyhole, as though someone attempted to pick it before resorting to the dagger. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, a fine observation. The tumbler mechanism resists casual intrusion. The scratch marks indicate an intimate familiarity with lockpicking or a measured attempt by someone desperate to reach the diary. They lifted the drawer carefully, prizing the dagger free with a pair of gloved fingers. The wood released a low groan, and the blade clattered onto the leather blotter. Poirot studied the jagged indentations left by the handle. These indentations are not uniform. The assailant applied pressure unevenly, perhaps fearing resistance within the lock. Geraldine hovered at the doorway, wringing her hands. Surely you will find who did this. Poirot turned to her with gentle reassurance. We shall, mademoiselle, but first we must inspect every subtle detail. He moved next to the writing surface. The blotter bore a faint imprint of several lines of writing words, now smudged beyond recognition by the damp air. The smudges tell us more, Poirot explained. Lady Millicent was writing when she paused abruptly. The ink imprint suggests these words were fresh, perhaps still wet when the air in the room became charged with tension. Miss Penelope Sterling, the governess, stepped forward. I did notice the air change, though I attributed it to the approaching storm. Poirot shook his head. None, madame, it was the arrival of malice. He glanced at the blotter. These impressions, could you read the words if I retrieved them with a cloth? Penelope bent to examine the blotter. Only fragments. Perhaps confession and admit. Poirot nodded, taking a small magnifying glass from his coat pocket. Excellent. Confession is a potent word. I suspect Lady Millicent was recording someone else's secret, a confession she obtained. Perhaps to protect or to threaten, Inspector Lewis made a note. A blackmail scenario. Possibly, Poirot mused, or a moral duty. But the question remains. Whose confession, and why would that person risk murder to keep it concealed? Poirot then inspected the reticule, now placed upon a side table. He withdrew the silver key and held it to the light. "Notice the key's cut," he said. "It is custom-made, and only one duplicate exists. Lady Millicent always carried it. Yet look here," he pointed to the key's bow. "A faint scuff. Have any of you seen Lady Millicent handle her key roughly?" Lord Alistair Blackwood, standing primly, cleared his throat. "She has suffered these last weeks from ill health. She dropped the key once during her convalescence." Poirot's manner softened. "I sympathize, Lord, but this scuff was recent, within a day or two. It suggests frantic use. Geraldine." Faraday's brows knit. "I did notice her keychain jingling more often of late. She fiddled with it during dinner." Poirot pressed a gloved finger gently against the scuff. "Yes, here, a slight groove, as though someone tried to ascertain its shape by feel. Could our assailant have handled the key itself?" Silence fell. Only the patter of rain against the windows broke the stillness. Finally, Poirot turned his attention to the group of suspects assembled in the room. He observed their reactions, some tense, some guarded, some indifferent. "Each of you has secrets," he announced, "and each of you had the opportunity to threaten Lady Millicent's diary." He paused, measuring their expressions. Miss Sterling swallowed. "I admit, I dusted this room late last night. I couldn't sleep." Colonel Hastings interjected. "But you would not damage a lady's property, Penelope." She shook her head. "No, but I might have handled her belongings." "In other words," Poirot said gently, "you held the key." She looked down, troubled. "I saw it in her reticule as I cleaned. I wanted to return it to her, so I borrowed it tonally for a moment." Poirot inclined his head. A plausible act. Yet the scuff marks appeared deeper than incidental handling. Geraldine Faraday bristled. "And what of me? I brought her tea." "Last night, indeed," Poirot acknowledged. "You opened the door, saw the scene, and yet did not touch the key." Geraldine's cheeks coloured. I panicked." Poirot stepped back. "Therein lies our next clue. Fear. Fear drives the hand to grasp or to destroy. Our assailant was motivated by dread of what Lady Millicent held within her diary." Inspector Lewis folded his notebook. "Your method is unique, monsieur." "Poirot, but undeniably effective." Poirot smiled. "Thank you, Inspector. But the first clues are seldom the entirety of the puzzle. They merely point us toward the corners of human nature where darkness festers." He turned to Lady Millicent, who watched the proceedings with curious eyes. "Madame, you revealed that you recorded a visitor's confession. We have discovered evidence of an attempted picklock, smudged confessional notes, and a threatened key. Tonight, we shall learn whose secret is worth killing to conceal." As the rain intensified, streaking the tall windows with silver rivulets, the group dispersed to their rooms, each weighed down by suspicion. And Poirot, alone in the drawing-room, pressed his fingertips together and murmured to himself, "The little grey cells are humming, mise, amis. Already they whisper of betrayal." In that charged atmosphere, the first clues had been gathered. The true game was only just beginning. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects. By mid-morning, the rain had abated to a damp drizzle, yet the air within Blackwood Manor remained heavy with unspoken anxieties. Poirot invited the household and guests to the oak-panelled drawing room now cordoned off from the rest of the house under the pretense of reviewing the morning's findings. One by one, they assembled beneath the low-hanging portrait of Lord Blackwood's late wife, whose stern gaze seemed to judge them all. First to arrive was Lord Alistair Blackwood himself, his posture rigid, his expression inscrutable. Clad in a charcoal morning suit, he stood by the hearth, hands clasped behind his back, as if bracing against a cold wind. His silver hair caught the light of the flickering fire, and his voice was measured as he greeted Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you have made progress." Poirot inclined his head politely. "Nous faisons des progrès, my lord, but there is much yet to learn." Geraldine Faraday entered next, smoothing the lace of her cuff anxiously. Her cheeks still bore the pallor of yesterday's shock. Though she tried to smile at her uncle, her eyes darted toward the other guests, as though fearing each might accuse her of worse than mere clumsiness. From the hallway, Edward Carrington appeared, carrying a leather portfolio. "I thought it best to bring my notes on the Manor's recent financial affairs," he said, placing them on a side table. Dark circles under his eyes revealed many late nights spent poring over ledgers. He seemed tense, constantly checking his gold watch as though worried about something beyond the time. Penelope Sterling followed, clutching her embroidery bag. Her governess's posture was demure, but her gaze betrayed a shrewd intelligence. She lingered by the window, as if gathering courage to speak, then took a seat near the wall, fingers twisting silk thread into tight knots. Lucien Devereux, the novelist, arrived last. He carried himself with an easy self-assurance, though his sharp eyes missed little. In one hand he held a copy of his own scandalous society novel, which he offered in a gesture part charming. "I find reading about intrigue helps clear the mind," he quipped, glancing at Geraldine, who offered only a stiff nod. Colonel Hastings remained standing by the window, surveying the group with a calm yet critical air. "Quite the assembly. Nest C. P.A. Poirot," he remarked softly. Poirot moved to the centre of the circle. "Mies, Amos, we are gathered not for pleasantries, but for truth." He paused to let the weight of his words settle. "Each of you had access to Lady Miller's private sanctum. Each of you holds knowledge, perhaps secrets, that she recorded in her diary. Tonight, we shall learn why someone dared to threaten her confidence." He beckoned Lord Blackwood forward. "My lord, you have overseen the family's affairs these past decades. You are fond of Lady Millicent, are you not?" Lord Blackwood's steely voice betrayed no emotion. "She is my niece. I cared for her after my brother's death, but recently she spoke of matters that troubled her deeply. I implored her not to reveal family business. Indeed." Poirot's tone was light, but his eyes narrowed. "And what, exactly, did she intend to reveal, my lord?" Geraldine interjected, voice soft. She spoke of a dispute over inheritance. There were rumours that Uncle Alistair planned to alter the will. A flicker of tension passed over Lord Blackwood's face before he recovered. "Family rumours, nothing more." Poirot nodded. "Family rumours can be poisonous, spreading mistrust." He turned to Edward Carrington. "Monsieur Carrington, you manage the Blackwood estate's finances. Did you note any irregularities or unexpected provisions in the trust fund?" Carrington cleared his throat. "Lady Millicent discovered a discrepancy, a transfer of funds from her account to an offshore company linked, allegedly, to the Manors. Creditor." He tapped his portfolio. "I have the documents here." He opened a folder and revealed ledger sheets. "See here, a £5,000 payment made without her authorization, dated 2 weeks ago." Lord Blackwood's jaw tightened. I made that transfer to cover unpaid taxes on Tilbury Hall without consulting the rightful owner. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Yet you expected no objection. Lord Blackwood's voice was low. Circumstances required prompt action. Poirot let the matter rest and shifted his attention to Penelope Sterling. Miss Sterling, as governess you observed the household's most intimate moments. Did you notice any interactions between Lady Millicent and the staff? Perhaps confidences shared? Penelope clasped her hands. She confided in me that she feared someone within the household. Perhaps a servant was acting against her, but she did not specify who. Fear, Poirot said softly, can be both guide and deception. He studied her face. Tell me, did you ever handle her diary key? Her cheeks flushed. Only once, when Lord Alistair asked me to return it to her. She paused, then added, I did not read. Her entries, T.R.S. Bean, Poirot whispered, offering a small nod. He turned to Lucien Devereux. Monsieur Devereux, your novel portrays high society scandals. Do you draw inspiration from true events? Devereux laughed lightly. Only from those whispered behind silken fans. But, Monsieur Poirot, surely you do not suspect me of relating fiction to reality? Perhaps not, Poirot replied. Yet you have spent many evenings in Lady Millicent's company, discussing scandalous subjects. Might she have mentioned something to you in confidence? Lucien's composure flickered. We spoke of art, literature, and personal matters, but nothing I would call a confession. Poirot's gaze lingered on him. Personal matters can be deeply personally and dangerous if revealed. The tension in the room rippled as the guests exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot sensed their walls were closing in. He paused, then raised his hand. Now, before we proceed further, let us consider one more presence. The butler, Thomas. At that name, the wide oak door opened to admit Thomas, his professional demeanour intact despite the morning's disruptions. Monsieur Poirot, you summoned me. We, Thomas. We are constructing the timeline of last night's events. You were the only servant on duty in the West Wing after 10 o'clock. Thomas inclined his head. Yes, monsieur, I oversaw the evening's preparations and then retired to polish silver in the saloon. I heard nothing unusual until Miss Faraday discovered the dagger, and the front door was secured. Impossible to open from the outside, Thomas confirmed. I double-checked it after breakfast. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. So our assailant was already within the household, or had entry by duplicate key. The implication hung in the air. The murderer was one of them. Poirot turned back to the group. In this closed circle, motives swirl like the remnants of a storm. Envy, desperation, fear, and perhaps forbidden love. We have heard of inheritance disputes, financial irregularities, unspoken confidences, and scandalous conversation. Tomorrow we shall delve deeper, but for now I entrust you each to reflect upon your own part in this drama. One by one, the suspects rose and departed, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. Geraldine paused to glance over her shoulder, her eyes questioning. Lucien offered a courteous nod, though his lips were pressed thin. Penelope's gaze flickered with uncertainty. Lord Blackwood remained by the hearth, as if unwilling to relinquish the room's tension. Even Carrington lingered briefly, smoothing his portfolio with a faint sigh. Once the door closed, Poirot and Hastings stood alone. Colonel Hastings exhaled. They bear their secrets lightly, but under that weight they strain. Poirot smiled, fingertips poised in his characteristic manner. Ah, but the burden of guilt is heavier still, and when the mind trembles under its own deceptions, the truth shines more brightly. He looked toward the portrait of Lady Blackwood on the wall. Tomorrow the gathering will continue, and the one who struck the dagger can no longer hide behind polite society. Outside, the grey skies pressed low, as if eager to bear witness to the revelations yet to come. And within Blackwood Manor, the game of shadows advanced into its next perilous stage. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives there. Late morning light filtered through the tall sash windows of Blackwood Manor's grand foyer, illuminating motes of dust that danced like restless spirits in the air. The storm had passed fully now, leaving only a damp chill that seeped through the stone walls and crept along the tiled floor. It was at this hour that Hercule Poirot made his formal entrance to the assembled household, his arrival timed to coincide with the changing of the guard at midday, ritual that no longer held any semblance of routine under the shadow of last night's events. Clad in his customary frock coat of midnight blue, with starched white collar perfectly pressed, Poirot descended the sweeping staircase with a flourish that commanded attention. His gait was measured, deliberate, as though each step were a punctuation in a discourse he alone fully understood. At the foot of the stairs, he paused to allow his gaze to sweep across the gathering. Lord Alistair Blackwood, immobile by the grand piano, Geraldine Faraday, standing near the coat rack as though uncertain where to place herself, Edward Carrington, absorbed in a leather-bound ledger, Penelope Sterling, clutching her umbrella, and Lucien Devereux, who hovered by an antique umbrella stand, one eyebrow arched in amused curiosity. Poirot inclined his head at each in turn. "Madame et messieurs," he announced in his crisp French accent, voice clear and resonant. "I thank you for gathering once more to discuss events of grave importance." He glanced at Hastings, who was stationed slightly to one side, notebook in hand, ready to record. The colonel gave a slight nod of encouragement. Lord Blackwood cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, have you drawn any conclusions?" Poirot smiled faintly, his moustaches twitching. "Patience, my lord, patience. One does not rush the little grey cells. They must be fed carefully with facts, observations, and revelations." He produced from his inner coat pocket a narrow leather wallet, which he opened with a gesture almost ritualistic. From it he withdrew a small bundle of folded papers he had retrieved from the blotter smudges. Holding them before the group, he continued, "I asked Miss Sterling last night to preserve the impression of those smudges, and with the aid of a dampened cloth, I have recovered fragments of the writing." He unfolded one sheet and peered through his pince-nez. "I see the words I cannot conceal any more, and here fear will. The final letters are torn. But the implication is clear. Someone confessed to Lady Millicent and feared the consequences if her diary were discovered." A ripple of unease moved through the group. Geraldine's face paled, and she pressed her hand to her lips. Carrington's jaw clenched, and Penelope's fingertips stilled on her embroidery. Only Lucien Devereux appeared indifferent, his posture relaxed as though entertained by a novel's unfolding drama. Poirot pocketed the papers and surveyed them all. "This confession concerns one of you. It is the key that unlocks motive." He paused to let the weight of his words sink in. "But we are not yet ready to accuse. First, we must establish presence and opportunity. Let us retrace the steps of last evening, from the moment of Lady Millicent's retiring until discovery of the dagger." He motioned to Hastings, who stepped forward. "Colonel, Would you kindly recount the timeline as we now understand it? Hastings cleared his throat. At 7:30 p.m., Lady Millicent entered her dressing room. At 7:45, Miss Faraday brought her tea. Between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, most guests dined in the great hall. I escorted Lord Blackwood to the billiard room. Miss Sterling retired to her quarters. On the second floor to finish her embroidery, Mr. Carrington remained in the library reviewing accounts, and Mr. Devereux, as he mentioned, paced the conservatory, composing he said an idea for his next chapter. I was indeed, Devereux interjected smoothly. I find that dramatic tension often yields to better prose when experienced first-hand. Poirot nodded gravely. And yet you witnessed nothing untoward. Devereux's smile wavered. I heard a muffled sound, perhaps, a scuffing of feet around 8:15. But I attributed it to the wind rattling the shutters. Shutters do not scuff, Poirot murmured, but let us proceed. He turned to Carrington. Monsieur Carrington, you claim to have remained in the library. Did you at any point handle Lady Millicent's key? Carrington hesitated, then admitted, yes, I noticed it on the side table as I passed. I intended to return it, but urgency in my work distracted me. I meant to do so later. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, Miss Sterling attests you did not. Carrington's lips compressed. I did not disturb her reticule. I only looked upon the key. Taurus Bean, Poirot said, arching a finger. Observation without action. Yet that act in itself tells us something. The key intrigued you enough to hold it. He surveyed Penelope Sterling. Madame, you returned it. She lowered her gaze. Yes, I placed it back in her reticule around 8:20. I wished to spare her distress. And Lord Blackwood, Poirot addressed the family patriarch. At what time did you leave the billiard room? Lord Blackwood's voice was measured. I retired to my study shortly after dinner. I had letters to write. Poirot made a note. No access to the west wing from your study, I presume. Invisible walls do not bar a determined visitor, Lord Blackwood observed dryly. Poirot allowed a small smile, but one without a key would struggle. Silence followed, punctuated by the crackle of the hearth. Poirot folded his hands. We have established that all had opportunity, yet motive remains uncertain. Let us now examine emotional states. He walked to the chaise longue and seated himself, beckoning the others to stand in a semicircle. I shall propose a series of statements. Respond simply with oui or nan. The first statement, I had reason to fear what Lady Millicent's diary would reveal about me. One by one, they answered. Lord Blackwood, nan. Geraldini, Faraday, oui. Edward Carrington, none. Penelope Sterling, none. Lucien Devereux, oui. Poirot paused. To admissions, Miss Faraday and Monsieur Devereux both feared exposure. Geraldine trembled. I only feared that family secrets would be exposed. But I did not threaten her. Devereux inclined his head. Similarly, I feared that certain personal indiscretions might appear in print. Indiscretions, Poirot repeated, of the heart of scandal. Devereux's eyes flickered. A gentleman does not discuss his indiscretions. Poirot rose and approached Devereux, studying him intently. But a gentleman might threaten the keeper of those secrets. Attention crackled like static electricity. Devereux's composure faltered. You have no proof. Proof shall emerge, Poirot assured him quietly, when the next breadcrumb of truth is revealed. He turned back to the group. Now, let us consider emotional reactions last night. Who among you showed the greatest relief when you learned Lady Millicent was unhurt? Geraldine whispered, I did. Anyone else? Poirot asked. No one spoke. The heart quickens at escape, does it not? Poirot mused. Relief can reveal culpability. He paced slowly, letting the group absorb his insight. Monsieur Devereux, you had motive. Mademoiselle, you felt dread. Yet the act itself required both fear and resolve. Who among you is capable of wielding a dagger to convey a warning? Again, silence. Then Lord Blackwood stepped forward. My family's honor matters, but I would never resort to violence. I believe you, Lord Poirot replied gently. Violence is an act of desperation. He fixed his gaze on Carrington. Monsieur, you have financial worries. A misplaced fortune could ruin you. Carrington's shoulders tensed. My worries would never drive me to threaten a lady. Poirot inclined his head and faced Penelope Sterling. And you, Madame Fearful, yes, but of harm to whom? She swallowed. Of harm to Lady Millicent, if her secrets came to light. Protective fear, Poirot murmured. Yet protective fear does not harm the object of affection. He reflected for a moment, fingertips steepled. The little grey cells tell me that the threat to the drawer was more than mere intimidation. It was a message. I know your secret. He turned to Hastings. Colonel, would you fetch me the guest book from last evening's supper? Hastings complied, retrieving the slender volume. Poirot opened it and scanned the signatures, then closed the book gently. All were present. No uninvited guest. Thus, our circle remains intact. At that moment, a soft knock on the door announced Thomas the butler. He entered and bowed. Excuse the interruption, monsieur. Miss Blackwood requests your presence in the conservatory. Poirot nodded and gestured for the others to follow. Come, Mies Amos. The garden house may yield new observations. As they walked through the grand hallway, the group exchanged anxious glances. The game was shifting to a new arena, and each knew that under Poirot's keen scrutiny, no deception could stand unchallenged. In the hushed passageway, Poirot whispered to Hastings, the mind of the culprit staggers beneath the weight of fear and guilt. There we shall find our next clue. And so, with measured steps, the company proceeded toward the conservatory, their fates entwined in the web of secrets that only Poirot's relentless logic could unravel. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. The conservatory was a pavilion hung with trailing ferns and pots of orchid blooms, their petals slick with last night's rain. The midday sun, pale behind drifting clouds, cast a muted glow over the marble floor. Here, Poirot had elected to conduct his first round of interviews, each suspect to be examined in turn, away from prying ears. Colonel Hastings took up a position by the entrance, pen and notebook at the ready, while Poirot signalled Geraldine Faraday to approach first. Geraldine's slender figure trembled as she stepped forward. Poirot seated himself in a wicker chair, beside a small table. Mademoiselle, he began in gentle tones, pray sit. She lowered herself onto the edge of a matching seat, clutching her handkerchief. Her eyes flickered to Hastings, then back to Poirot. You confessed fear of exposure, Poirot said, fixing her with his dark gaze. Tell me what you feared. Geraldine cleared her throat. Uncle Alistair was considering changes to the will. I overheard fragments of conversation. I feared that if Lady Millicent revealed those plans, our family's reputation would crumble. Poirot nodded. And did you confront your uncle? She shook her head. No, I did not wish to embroil myself in such affairs. Yet you threatened her diary, Poirot observed softly. A threat is an entanglement of its own. Geraldine's lip quivered. I never meant to frighten her so grievously. I intended only to remind her of discretion. Remind, Poirot repeated. How did you propose to remind her? Her eyes filled, by showing the cost of secrecy, a sharp shock to deter loose lips. Such a method, Poirot commented, requires resolve and familiarity with your target. He studied her hands, pale, slender, unpalest. Have you ever handled a dagger before? She looked away. No. Then how could you be so certain of your aim? Geraldine hesitated, glancing at the orchid blooms. I borrowed Uncle's fencing kit once. I know the posture. Poirot allowed the statement to hang, then dismissed her with a gentle nod. She rose, composed herself, and returned to join the others in silent rows of chairs. Next, Edward Carrington was ushered forward. He appeared every bit the impecunious accountant, rumpled morning coat, ink-stained fingers, a worried crease between his brows. Poirot motioned to a rotillon bench at the edge of the planting beds. Monsieur Carrington, he began, you manage the estate's finances. Carrington inclined his head. Yes, Monsieur Poirot, you discovered a transfer you deemed unauthorized. Carrington's jaw tightened. I did. Did you confront Lady Millicent? There was no time. The audit deadline loomed. Poirot leaned forward. Deadlines can drive men to desperate acts. Carrington's gaze flickered to the polished stalks of a palm frond. It was never my intention to alarm her. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Yet you handled her key. Carrington's shoulders slumped, only to observe its cut. I wanted to craft a duplicate in case of loss. An understandable precaution, Poirot conceded. But forging a key is an act of premeditation. Carrington swallowed. I feared that if funds were further depleted, I would be dismissed in disgrace. And the dagger. The accountant's eyes widened. I would never threaten her with violence. For many, fear translates into threats. Poirot tapped a fingertip against his palm. Tell me, did you at any point linger in the West Wing after 8? Carrington hesitated. I passed the doorway of her dressing room to fetch more paperwork. Did anyone see you? No. Poirot sat back, steepling his fingers. Then opportunity and motive converged dangerously close. He dismissed Carrington with a nod, and the man retreated, shoulders hunched under the weight of both accusation and relief. Penelope Sterling was next, guided to a small iron love seat beneath a hanging basket of fuchsia. Her governess's posture was impeccable, her knitting needles clacking with nervous energy even before she spoke. Madame, Poirot began, you dusted Lady Millicent's room last night. Penelope nodded. I wished to calm my mind. The storm kept me awake, and you handled her personal effects. I arranged her reticule and smoothed her desk. She replied, Did you glimpse her diary? No, she touched her throat as if to soothe a swallow. I respected her privacy. Poirot's gaze was gentle. Yet you rescued the key. Penelope blinked. I returned, if fearful it might be lost. He studied her knitting an intricate pattern of ivy leaves. Your hands are skilled, madame, yet the scuff on the key indicates a trialandera shaping by feel. Do your needles ever carve wood? Her eyes grew wide. Never. Then who did? She shook her head. I do not know, Poirot. Let the silence grow, letting Hastings note every nuance of her reaction. Finally, he dismissed her with a nod. She rose, clasped her work to her chest, and joined the others. Careful to keep her distance from Carrington and Geraldine, Lucien Devereux approached last, his stride assured. He selected a wrought iron chair painted with trailing vines, crossing, one leg over the other in a studied pose. Monsieur Devereux Poirot greeted him. You heard a scuffle, or something you deemed disturbance. Devereux inclined his head. A brief rustling of leaves, I thought. In a conservatory, Devereux's lips curved. The palms brushed against the glass. Perhaps. Poirot's eyes locked onto his. You feared your indiscretions were laid bare. Devereux's composure faltered. My indiscretions are mine alone. I trust Madame's discretion as I would my own. Trust can be fickle, Poirot observed. You discussed scandal with her revealed confidences about your acquaintances. Devereux's gaze sharpened. Intimate conversation, yes, but confessions, indeed. Poirot unfolded one of the recovered papers. These words I cannot conceal any more. The imprints originate from your handwriting style, curved loops and elongated tails. A hush descended. Devereux's face went pale. You have no proof, only impressions. Poirot rose, pocketing the fragment. But impressions can be as telling as fingerprints. With that, Devereux stood abruptly and rejoined the group. Silence trailing in his wake. The assembled suspects watched him, suspicion flickering anew in their eyes. Poirot dismissed Hastings's note-taking with a graceful nod. Mies Amos, thank you for your candour. But candour alone will not unmask the culprit. He turned to the group at large. Each interview has revealed motive, opportunity, and what you hoped each other would conceal. Yet one truth remains. The mind that wields a dagger in the dark fears exposure more than death itself. He paused, letting the gravity of his statement hang in the humid air. Tonight, the house will be quieter. I advise each of you to reflect upon what you have revealed, both in words and in silences. For tomorrow, the next phase begins, the false lead. A tremor passed among them at the mention of that phrase. Hastings closed his notebook, and Poirot offered a final, benevolent smile. Go now, until the hour of our next meeting. And remember, the true confession lies not only on paper, but in the beating heart of its keeper. As the suspects filed out, heads bowed and nerves taut, Poirot and Hastings remained alone in the fading light of the conservatory. The detective's little grey cells, he declared, were already dancing with anticipation. The investigation had begun in earnest, and, with every whispered fear and furtive glance, the path to the murderer grew clearer, albeit winding and treacherous. Chapter 6. The first false lead. Late that afternoon, as the last pale light filtered through the tall windows of the library, Poirot summoned Inspector Lewis to review a new piece of evidence that had come to light. The group reconvened in the room where the fire blazed low in its grate, lending the occupants a soft, flickering glow. The suspects, having retreated to their studies and drawing rooms since their interviews, now filed in one by one at Poirot's. Invitation, weariness etched on their faces. Inspector Lewis laid a small pouch on the mahogany table. Monsieur Poirot, this was found in the rose garden by the gardener beneath the old sundial, he announced. He opened the leather pouch carefully to reveal the blood-stained glove, its fingertips darkened by crimson, and a slender, spiraled hairpin encrusted with a single garnet. A collective gasp rose from the assembled company. Poirot inclined his head. Our assailant discarded these in haste, believing perhaps they would never be discovered. He held the glove aloft by its wrist. Observe the delicate, stitching finely. Made, designed for a lady's hand, yet the blood upon it is fresh, and the fibres suggest a struggle. He laid the glove gently back on the table and picked up the hairpin. This accessory belongs to none but one in this room. He turned to Geraldine Faraday, who sat rigid in her chair, fingers twisting the lace of her cuff. Geraldine's voice trembled. "I lost that hairpin last evening. I cannot imagine how it came to be here." She rose to her feet, pale and shaking. "I was in the rose garden at dusk walking to calm my nerves. I didn't encounter anyone, nor did I feel frightened." She pressed a hand to her throat. "But I did discover a wound on my wrist when I returned to the house. A nick accidental, I thought, from a rosebush." She looked to the hairpin. "I must have dropped it then." Her gaze flickered to the glove. "But whose blood is that?" Edward Carrington, seated nearby, leaned forward. "Miss Faraday, that glove is embroidered with your initials, G.F. His tone was calm, yet his eyes shone with accusation. "And the cut on your wrist could be mere coincidence. But the glove suggests you struggled with someone and that someone wounded you in turn." A hush fell. Penelope Sterling rose unsteadily to her feet. "Geraldine, are you certain you were alone?" she asked in a soft voice. Geraldine shook her head. "I remember only the quiet evening air, the scent of roses, and the snap of a twig." As I walked the path, she glanced at Lucien Devereux, who stood by the fireplace, arms folded. His expression had hardened, as though the discovery confirmed his suspicions. Poirot raised a slender finger. "Let us not jump to conclusions. A glove and a hairpin are significant, but their context must be understood." He turned to Inspector Lewis. "Where precisely in the garden was this found?" "The sundial path, midway between the rose beds and the fountain," Lewis replied. "The ground there is soft, so prints might have been left, but the gardener saw none save those belonging to Miss Faraday's shoes." Poirot nodded. "And when did you inspect the scene?" "Shortly after 9, Lewis said. "I accompanied the gardener under Poirot's instructions to retrace last night's movements." A murmur passed through the group. Geraldine's shoulders trembled as she sank back into her seat. "Monsieur Poirot, this makes me appear guilty of the attack on Lady Millicent." "Indeed," Poirot replied gravely, "it appears so at first glance. But appearances are fleeting." He folded his hands. "Consider, why would our culprit leave such unmistakable tokens behind? A violently stained glove, bearing one's initials, surely an unwise choice if one wished to conceal involvement." Geraldine's voice cracked. "Then who planted these?" To frame me, Poirot's eyes swept the assembled faces. The first false lead often emerges when one desires to divert attention. A frame can be a tool of desperation, and desperation is the culprit's companion. Inspector Lewis exchanged a look with Colonel Hastings. "Shall we examine the glove more closely?" Poirot held up the glove again. "Note the pattern of the blood on the inside of the fingers. It suggests the wearer clutched something, perhaps a handle or another hand, when wounded." He turned it inside out, revealing clean leather beneath. Yet the outside is impaled only at the fingertips. Strange. Carrington leaned in. Could it have been cut by the same dagger used on Lady Millicent's desk? Poirot considered. The blade is similar, yes, but the angle differs. And the wound on Lady Millicent's drawer was inflicted at a downward trajectory. This cut is horizontal. He tapped the glove lightly. These are likely different weapons, a dagger in the library, and perhaps a rose stem or garden tool here. Miss Sterling stepped forward, her governess's composure restored. I did see Miss Faraday return from the garden with blood on her sleeve. She hesitated, then continued, but she said it was only from a thorn. Did anyone else see her? Poirot asked. No, Penelope admitted. I was cleaning the greenhouse windows at the time. Geraldine shook her head vehemently. I was alone, I swear it. Poirot's gaze softened. I believe you, mademoiselle. But the question remains, who would benefit by making you appear guilty? Who among you harbored a desire to send suspicion onto my young friend, Lucien? Devereux spoke then, voice low. A woman scorned might act rashly, but who among us has cause to frame Geraldine? He glanced at Carrington. Perhaps the financier, to distract from other debts. Carrington bristled. I have debts, yes, but not of the sort that require poisoning or threats. Lord Blackwood cleared his throat. This is theatre. We are being manipulated, led astray by manufactured clues. Poirot raised a calming hand. Precisely, my lord. Manufactured clues. The art of misdirection is as old as deception itself. The glove and hairpin form our first false lead, meant to beguile us. The true clue lies elsewhere, hidden among more subtle details. Inspector Lewis frowned. What details remain? Poirot pointed to the garden planzer framed schematic on the wall. Observe the design of the rose garden. Notice how the path curves, creating a blind spot behind the sundial. One could stand there unseen. But the ground there is paved, not soft. Earth. Our gardener would have noticed footprints. He turned to Hastings. Colonel, had the footprints been examined anew? Hastings nodded. I walked the path myself. No prints aside from those of the gardener and Miss Faraday. Then the killer did not linger, Poirot concluded. They struck and fled. Swiftly, no time to ensure no traces remained. He paused, letting his words settle. The glove and hairpin are distractions, an attempt by our culprit to send us chasing ghosts while the true path remains. Who among you is clever enough to conceive such a ruse? Silence stretched taut. Each suspect met Poirot's gaze in turn, none prepared to volunteer the answer. Poirot folded his arms. Tonight we shall see whether this false lead confounds us further or whether, by ignoring the glaring and focusing on the concealed, we draw closer to the heart of the mystery. As the group dispersed once more into the corridors of Blackwood Manor, the glove and hairpin leapt upon the table seemed to gleam ominously in the firelighter, testament to the dangerous games a murderer might play. Yet for Poirot, these tokens would prove only a diversion, a prelude to the deeper puzzles yet to emerge. The true culprit, he was certain, would soon reveal themselves through subtler, more telling acts, and so the investigation pressed onward, guided by the detective's unwavering conviction that beneath every false lead lay the unmistakable echo of a single, unerring truth. Chapter 7. The psychological game. Late that evening, the candles in the drawing-room cast long, wavering shadows upon the high-backed chairs and gilded mirrors, giving the space an air of subtle menace. Poirot invited the suspects, Blackwood, Geraldine Faraday, Edward Carrington, Penelope Sterling, Lucien Devereux, and Inspector Lewis to gather once more around the marble-topped table. He offered each a glass of sherry, though only a few accepted, their hands unsteady or their eyes haunted by the day's revelations. Mies, Amos, Poirot began, his voice calm and deliberate. Tonight we engage in a different form of investigation. A psychological game, yes, but one that reveals far more than physical evidence alone. I shall pose questions designed to provoke emotional responses. In your answers or in your hesitations, we shall find the true character of the culprit. He looked first to Geraldine. Mademoiselle Faraday, tell us of your relationship with Lady Millicent. You call her cousin, yet I sense deeper affection. Geraldine's cheeks colored. She was the only family who truly understood me. She said softly, we shared confidences, more than any others in this household. Poirot inclined his head. A genuine bond, and in genuine bonds, betrayal cuts most deeply. You feared her revelations, yet loved her. How do you reconcile love with the act of threatening her? Geraldine's hand trembled around her glass. Love is complicated, Monsieur Poirot. He let the moment linger, then turned to Carrington. Monsieur Carrington, you manage fortunes. You spoke of duplicating a key and perhaps more. Tell me, have you ever betrayed a trust entrusted to you? Carrington's lips pressed thin. I have made errors, but never betrayal. Errors can be forgiven. Betrayal cannot, Poirot observed. Would you harm the person who placed her financial affairs in your hands? Carrington's gaze flicked to Geraldine. I would not harm her, but I might protect my own position. His answer sank into the silence like a stone. Poirot next addressed Penelope Sterling. Madame, as governess you shape young minds and guard innocence, yet you handled Lady Millicent's key in secret. Tell me, do good intentions justify deception? Penelope folded her hands tightly. I thought only to protect her from loss, from pain, and yet your deception concealed more than the key. Poirot pressed. It concealed your knowledge of her innermost thoughts. Her eyes glistened. I regret nothing that spared her agony. Regret is a confession in its own right, Poirot murmured. He turned to Devereux, who lounged with a practiced nonchalance. Monsieur Devereux, you fashion stories of scandal, weaving fact and fiction, but tonight the story is real. Do you distinguish between artistic license and moral license? Devereux leaned forward, eyes darting. Art demands exploration of human darkness, yet I do not own that darkness. Darkness is not a commodity to be traded, Poirot replied. It is a burden carried unwillingly by the innocent. Lucien's jaw tightened, but he said no more. Finally, Poirot addressed Lord Blackwood. My lord, you are the patriarch protector of name and lineage. Would you sacrifice one member of your family to preserve your legacy? Lord Blackwood's voice was cold. A family's reputation is its very soul, but I would never turn that soul to darkness. Poirot studied him closely. Darkness can be both chosen and foisted. Sometimes the architect of deception is the one who fears its weight most of all. Having laid these psychological traps, Poirot steepled his fingers and let the group sit with their unease. Then he quietly introduced pen and paper, asking each to write a single sentence. If you had one warning to give about secrets, what would you say? One by one, they scrawled messages. Geraldine's read, secrets are flowers that bloom, only to poison the hand that plucks them. Carrington's read, a locked door is only safe for those who hold the key. Penelope's read, shielded truths may slumber, but they awaken with vengeance. Devereux's read, every confession is a contract written in ink that cannot be erased. Lord Blackwood's read, trust is the fragile vessel in which power resides. Poirot collected the papers and laid them face down. These warnings, he said, reflect your inner fears and desires. They are metaphors for what each of you dreads most. He picked up Geraldine's note. Yours speaks of poison metaphorical, yet fitting for a threat delivered by blade. He then held Carrington's. Yours betrays obsession with a key hint at the act of duplicating and perhaps of betrayal. Penelope's alluded to vengeance, a motive that spurs violence. Devereux's to irreversible confession, and Lord Blackwood's to fragile trust. The suspects exchanged glances, unsettled by the accuracy of Poirot's insights. Poirot smiled softly. "Now turn your paper's face up." They complied, and he read each aloud, revealing how closely the metaphors matched the emerging facts. "The heart of our game," Poirot announced, "is to see who flinches most at the light of truth. And so I ask, who among you would wield fear as weapon, trusting that your note would be read only by Lady Millicent?" They hesitated. Then Geraldine rose, voice quavering. "I wrote mine in hope that she would see reason, not fear." "That is as it may be," Poirot replied. "Yet what you plant in another's mind grows according to its seed." Carrington and Penelope offered no defense. Devereux's scowl deepened, but he remained silent. Lord Blackwood simply folded his hands. Poirot concluded, "The psychological game is more revealing than any fingerprint or footprint. In words, in metaphors, in silences, the soul betrays itself." A distant grandfather clock chimed 10. Poirot rose with impeccable poise. "Retire now. Sleep on these reflections, for the murderer's identity grows clearer in mental stillness than in frantic pursuit." As the guests departed, each lost in private turmoil, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The mind of the assassin twists words into weapons, Hastings. Tonight we have gathered those weapons." Hastings nodded, closing his notebook. "And tomorrow we will see which one draws blood." Outside, the night air was cool and quiet, yet within Blackwood Manor, the psychological game continued, one whose final move would soon compel the culprit to reveal their true face. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery shortly after dawn. Lady Millicent summoned Hercule Poirot and Colonel Hastings to her study. The room was in disarray. The polished writing desk had been rifled, drawers left half open, and a single parchment lay upon the blotter, its edges singed and corners curled. The ornate safe built into the wall had been forced, its brass door hanging askew, and the safe's contents small, leather-bound packet stamped with the Blackwood crest had vanished. "My will," Lady Millicent gasped, eyes wide with dismay. "That packet contained my will and the codicil I added only last week." Poirot knelt beside the safe, examining the jagged mark where the lock had been pried. "See, Hastings, they applied leverage. Here, exactly where the metal is weakest." He tapped the edge with a gloved fingertip. "But note the lack of footprints on the rug other. The intruder wore soft shoes or knew precisely where to step." Hastings surveyed the room. "The window is latched from the inside. There is no sign of forced entry. Only those with key or inside knowledge could have accessed this sanctuary." Lady Millicent pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "Someone wants to invalidate my codicil. If the original will resurfaces without my amendments, my estate reverts entirely to Uncle Alistair." Lord Alistair Blackwood, summoned by the commotion, entered the room, expression grave. "Millicent, you must not jump to conclusions. Perhaps the safe's combination was entered incorrectly, and the packet fell behind." Geraldine Faraday joined them, her face drawn. "I retrieved your codicil only yesterday. It was in this packet. I saw it with my own eyes." Poirot rose and faced the assembled group. "Mies, Amos, we now have a second mystery. The disappearance of Lady Millicent's codicil. It appears planned and targeted, aimed at altering inheritance. This suggests a motive distinct from the dagger and the garden disgrace. Our culprit believes that by stealing the codicil, they can control the fate of Blackwood Manor. He turned to Edward Carrington. Monsieur, as steward of the estate's finances, you know the importance of such legal documents. Carrington bowed. Indeed, without the codicil, Lady Millicent's modifications are null. It would consolidate control under Lord Blackwood. Lord Blackwood's jaw tightened. You imply I orchestrated this theft? Not yet, Poirot replied calmly. First, we must consider opportunity and method. Who among us had knowledge of the safe's location and combination? Penelope Sterling raised her hand. I delivered Lady Millicent's breakfast here this morning and noticed the safe door slightly ajar. Poirot nodded. A timely observation, madame, but did you handle the door? I only closed it to protect the contents. She brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. I did not move any papers. Merci, Poirot said. And when did you last see the packet? Last night, when I dusted here around 9. She shivered. I knocked lightly, it rattled, and the codicil. Poirot picked up the charred parchment on the blotter. Its writing was partially legible. Millicent's signature and the new beneficiary clause, rendered unreadable by fire. This was placed on top, burned deliberately to destroy proof. Geraldine gasped. Who would dare set fire to her own heirloom? Someone desperate, Hastings murmured. Poirot walked to the window, studying the iron latch. The window was not used. No scorch marks on the sill. The theft occurred from within, by one who knew both location and contents. He returned to the center of the room. Now, consider the sequence. Last night, the dagger threat. This morning, the stolen codicil. 2 separate acts, each aimed at Lady Millicent's secrets. It reveals the killer's wider ambition, not merely to frighten, but to rewrite destiny. He paused, eyes on Lord Blackwood. You have the most to gain if the codicil is lost. Yet you denied involvement, and no physical evidence links you to the scene. Lord Blackwood's voice was cold. I have never harmed Millicent, nor would I. I love my family too much to destroy it. That may be, Poirot conceded, but love can be possessive, even destructive. He turned to Carrington. Monsieur, if you orchestrated this theft, you would need access to legal counsel's offices or duplicate keys. Carrington's expression wavered. I only know the code because Millicent showed it to me for safekeeping. Was that recent? Poirot asked. 2 days ago, Carrington admitted, voice hushed. She feared misplacing the code. Poirot nodded. Then the steward's knowledge is suspect. But I must ask, did you see anyone near this room after 9? No, Carrington said. I was in the library until late. Anyone else have knowledge of the combination? Poirot asked. Geraldine raised her hand. She told me as a precaution. We feared thieves on the estate. Interesting, Poirot murmured. 2 persons now know the code, Monsieur Carrington. And Mademoiselle Faraday. He surveyed Geraldine. You claimed to love her, yet your earlier fear suggests you might seize power. Geraldine recoiled. I would never steal from her. I do not yet accuse, Poirot replied. Only observe. He turned to Penelope. Madame, you dust every corner. Did you notice any smudge, imprint, or footmark? She paused. There was a faint leather, print size small, near the safe space. I thought it belonged to Lady Millicent's slippers. or to someone wearing soft shoes, Poirot observed. Like a governess. Penelope's face paled. I assure you, Poirot held up a hand to calm her. Evidence speaks before accusation. Now, one more question. Who among us would benefit from removing the codicil beyond Lord Blackwood? Silence greeted the challenge. Then Edward Carrington spoke in a low tone. If Lady Millicent's mother's line regained full control, the estate's finances would be redirected. My position would be secured under new guardianship. A hush fell. Hastings looked amazed. Penelope's hands trembled. Geraldine squeezed the arm of her chair. Lucien Devereux, who had been silent, finally spoke. And you would burn the codicil. Such an act is criminal and cruel. Carrington shrugged. Disperace chimis. Poirot raised his eyebrows. Desperation breeds folly. But no confession yet. We need more. He strode to the desk and examined the papers strewn across it. Amongst the charred scrap he found a single, undamaged page-printed invitation to a ball at Blackwood Manor, dated 2 weeks hence. He handed it to Hastings. Notice this, Hastings. An event where all would gather. Our culprit chose to act before the guests arrived, ensuring solitude. Hastings nodded. So the window of opportunity was narrow. Exactly, Poirot tapped the invitation. A miscalculation, for it left this backup document untouched. He pointed to the invitation. It names trustees who would validate the original will. If only we can locate their signatures, the codicil can be reinstated. Lady Millicent's eyes brightened with hope. Then there is a way to reverse this. Poirot smiled. Yes, madame. But first, we must identify the thief. And to do so, we follow the footprints of motive and method starting here. He turned to the assembled group. Tonight, each of you will attend the ball. I expect to observe your interactions closely. The thief must mingle, perhaps to ascertain whether the original will remains valid in other hands. As the suspects departed to prepare, a palpable tension settled over Blackwood Manor. 2 mysteries now danced in the halls. The dagger threat and the stolen codicil. And at the heart of them, Hercule Poirot's little grey cells whirred with anticipation, weaving threads of truth from the tangled skein of deception. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor dazzled under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, their prisms scattering light across the polished parquet floor and gilded cornices. A full-string quartet played a lilting waltz beneath the arched windows, where moonlight mixed with the last glow of gas lamps. Guests in silken gowns and frock coats glided across the hall, their laughter and conversation weaving a tapestry of polite gaiety that belied the storm of intrigue beyond the painted walls. Hercule Poirot, resplendent in his evening tailcoat and starched white cravat, observed from a small dais beside Colonel Hastings. Hastings stood at his side, notebook tucked beneath his arm, ready to record emerging details. Poirot's sharp gaze flitted from one pair of dancers to another, noting expressions, gestures, and the infinitesimal signs of concealed emotion. Amos Poirot murmured, "Tonight we see beyond the facade of festivity. In the worlds of the dance, we shall detect secret partnerships, alliances, born of fear, necessity, or ambition. Let us begin." He motioned to Geraldine Faraday, who entered the ballroom on Lord Blackwood's arm. She wore a pale blue gown that echoed the storm-tossed sky of yesterday's rain, her face composed yet weary. Across the room, Edward Carrington stood alone by the refreshments table, absently adjusting his cuffs as he surveyed the dancers. Penelope Sterling moved through the crowd, offering polite greetings to Lady Millicent's guests, yet her eyes darted toward the doors as though seeking an unnoticed arrival. Lucien Devereux, ever the novelist, leaned against a column, notebook in hand, sketching furtive observations. Poirot turned to Hastings. "Observe how Miss Faraday's smile falters when Lord Blackwood approaches. A daughter's respect, yes, but also a caution born of unspoken tension." Hastings nodded, pen poised. "Note Monsieur Carrington's glances toward the library wing entrance," Poirot continued. "He recalls where the codicil once lay. His financial anxiety haunts him still." They watched as Carrington caught Penelope's eye. She offered an arch of the brow and a subtle incline of her head, then moved away. Carrington's shoulders dropped in relief for disappointment. "Ah," Poirot whispered, "a secret meeting prevented, or an invitation declined." He sipped a glass of champagne before returning. His attention to the dancers. Geraldine stepped into the circle of guests and found herself partnered by Lucien Devereux. As they began to waltz, their movements were graceful, but their conversation remained inaudible to onlookers. Poirot narrowed his eyes. "They dance well," he said softly, yet her eyes betray something more than pleasure. Hastings bent to note the observation. Across the room, Lord Blackwood approached Carrington with measured steps. They clasped hands in greeting, but Carrington's grip was stiff. Their exchange was brief, and Lord Blackwood's lips pressed into a thin line as he inclined his head. "Financial counsel questioned by its master," Poirot commented. "A sign of discord." Penelope Sterling intercepted Geraldine and Lucien at the refreshment table. She dropped a courtesy curtsy, and Geraldine offered a tight smile. Penelope leaned in and spoke softly. Geraldine's cheeks flushed, and she excused herself abruptly. Moving toward Lady Millicent near the dais, Poirot observed, "Miss Sterling warns the young lady perhaps of impending revelation." Protective instinct, yet tinged with fear. He then made note of Lucien's exchange with the butler, Thomas, who had quietly entered the ballroom to replenish order. Lucien motioned toward the west wing door and pointed to his notebook. Thomas inclined his head, eyes flicking toward the floor, then hurried away. "A liaison between author and servant," Poirot murmured. "Such alliances often conceal secrets." "More damning than gossip." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Shall we investigate?" "Patience," Poirot cautioned. "Let us piece together all threads before drawing our loom tight." He turned to watch Geraldine with Lady Millicent. The aunt embraced her niece, whispering in her ear. Geraldine nodded and brushed at her gown, as though removing imaginary dust. "Words exchanged between blood relations are seldom benign," Poirot noted. "She may learn news that shifts her trust." Nearby, Lord Blackwood found Penelope alone beneath a balcony, peering into the moonlit gardens. He offered his arm, and she hesitated before accepting. They walked outside together, their heads bent in private discussion. The faint sound of their voices drifted through the open doors, Lord Blackwood's baritone low, Penelope's subdued yet insistent. Poirot whispered to Hastings, "They settle a new strategy. Watch whether their alliance holds when secrets emerge." A sudden hush fell as the quartet shifted to a slow adagio. The dancers paused, and all eyes turned toward the center of the ballroom, where Lady Millicent ascended a small platform. She stood beneath a spotlight of silver moonlight and cleared her throat. "My dear friends," she began, "I thank you for your kindness tonight. In light of recent distress, I wished to gather you in celebration rather than suspicion. Yet, I cannot ignore the trials we have faced. She paused, drawing a deep breath. Therefore, I propose a toast to truth, and to the bonds of family and friendship that will see us through. Glasses were lifted, and soft strains of the adagio resumed as refreshments were passed. Amid the clink of crystal, Poirot watched Lady Millicent's glance sweep the crowd. It landed briefly on Lucien Devereux, then on Carrington, then on Geraldine. Each subtly returned her gaze, an unspoken challenge in their eyes. Under pressure, Poirot observed, one acknowledges allies by shared looks and silences. As the music shifted again to a jovial polka, couples rejoined the dance. Poirot seized the moment. He approached Lucien Devereux, offering a courteous bow. "Monsieur, may I speak with you?" Lucien inclined his head. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot led him toward an alcove where moonlight filtered through stained glass. "You spoke with Thomas in secret," he stated. "What counsel did you seek from a humble servant?" Lucien's jaw tightened. "I merely asked whether the drawing-room is kept locked after midnight." "An odd question," Poirot said. "Yet it suggests you contemplate returning there. You don't suspect me?" Lucien challenged, voice low. Poirot's mustaches twitched. "I suspect your mind is a repository of others' secrets. But suspicion alone does not constitute guilt." He released Lucien and returned to Hastings. Hidden connections, governess and patriarch, author and servant, niece and aunt, steward and financier. Each pair shares knowledge, some of which could unravel another's lies. Hastings nodded. "Shall we confront them?" Poirot shook his head. "Not yet. First, let us observe one more nexus." He pointed toward the balcony doors, where Lord Blackwood and Penelope Sterling emerged from the gardens. Lord Blackwood's arm rested lightly on her waist, a gesture neither formal nor purely paternal. Penelope's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. "A personal connection," Poirot murmured. "I surmise Miss Sterling discovered something, perhaps a letter, a witness, or a motive that she shared with Lord Blackwood. And they forged an alliance?" Hastings asked. "In effect, yes," Poirot replied. "An alliance of convenience, to protect mutual interests. But alliances can fracture under exposure." He took Hastings's arm. "Come, let us return to our vantage point and let the dance proceed." They stood behind a column, watching as the ball resumed. In every clustered conversation, every sidelong glance, and every clasped hand, Poirot discerned the hidden connections that bound suspects together and set them against one another. As darkness falls, he whispered, these bonds will reveal their strengths and their weaknesses. And in the next stage, when tensions erupt, single thread will snap, exposing the murderer at last. Hastings closed his notebook, and Poirot, satisfied, turned his attention to the swirling patterns of the dancers, confident that the web of hidden connections was beginning to unravel. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clues. The morning after the ball, the corridors of Blackwood Manor were hushed, save for the soft echo of servants' footsteps and the distant murmur of voices preparing breakfast. Colonel Hastings found Hercule Poirot in the small morning room adjoining the library, seated before a low table strewn with sketches, notes, and the recovered fragments of Lady Millicent's diary pages. A single beam of sunlight caught the edge of one sketcher, careful drawing of the hairpin found in the rose garden, its garnet setting rendered in exquisite detail. "Mon cher ami," Hastings began, "you summoned me early. Have you uncovered something new?" Poirot looked up, his eyes bright. "Ah, Hastings, the little grey cells have been most diligent. Last night at the ball, I observed many things, the hidden alliances, the furtive glances, the fear that flickered when Lady Millicent proposed her toast. But one detail, overlooked by all, provides our next great advance. He slid forward a slender envelope, its flap sealed with crimson wax, bearing the black wood crest. Inside was a single sheet of fine vellum, stamped with a monogram in flowing silver. E.C. Hastings raised an eyebrow. Monsieur Carrington's initials. Precisely, Poirot replied, tapping the monogram with a fingertip. I found this in the conservatory last evening, tucked beneath a ledger on the refreshment table. At first glance, it appears a personal note, perhaps invitation or correspondence. But when I compared the monogram to the imprint on the leather pouch containing the garden glove, I noted an identical curve in the letter C, a key trait of Monsieur Carrington's stationery. Hastings leaned forward. What did the note say? Poirot unfolded the vellum. The ink was faint, but legible. Meet me by the sundial at midnight. We must discuss a matter of urgency. Trust no one. Notice the language, Poirot continued. No signature beyond the monogram. A private summons written in haste. The ink still slightly damp when dropped. It implies a secret rendezvous between two individuals outside the view of others. Who is the correspondent? Hastings asked. Poirot's moustaches twitched. That is the question. The monogram suggests Carrington as the sender, but the note could also be intended for him an unsigned response. Given the shift in ink hue, I suspect the latter. Someone wrote it with Carrington's pen, using his paper to lure him to the garden at midnight. Hastings whistled softly. A trap, then. Or a meeting. Poirot smiled faintly. But of what, and with whom? He spread the note beside the hairpin and the glove pouch. These three items are interwoven. The hairpin left by Geraldine, the glove bearing her blood, and now the note inviting her condemning Carrington to the sundial. The true culprit desires to implicate them both, perhaps to distract from their own involvement. Hastings tapped the note's words. Meet me by the sundial. Trust no one. Exactly, Poirot said. A fitting echo of the false lead in the garden. But this note reveals intention. Someone needed to be at the garden at midnight. We know Geraldine went there accidentally. Now we know Carrington was lured deliberately. Hastings frowned, but the rendezvous was missed. It appears so. The gardener found the pouch and hairpin at dawn, but no second person. Perhaps the sender waited alone, then fled when unseen. Hastings speculated. Possible, Poirot nodded. But note the timing. Midnight. At that hour, the household slept. The doors were locked, and only someone with inside knowledge could enter the garden. He rose and moved to the window, gazing at the Dukist lawn and the sundial just beyond the terrace. Yet no footprints, save those of Miss Faraday. The path is paved, the stones firm. Our gardener saw no prints. Hastings joined him. So the visitor must have walked on the grass edge or worn soft shoes. Most likely, Poirot agreed. But more revealing is the stationery itself. Only one writer in this house uses personalized monogrammed paper, Edward Carrington. Lady Millicent noted his meticulous record-keeping and gifted him a set of embossed stationery for his diligence, which gives him both motive and means to forge the note, Hastings observed. Poirot returned to the table, examining a ledger Carrington had used at the ball. He laid the vellum atop it and compared the handwriting. See here. The loop on the Y in U dips sharply before rising a flourish identical to Carrington's entries in his account books. Hastings peered over. He wrote his own summons, or he wrote someone else's, Poirot countered. A skilled forger might have mimicked his style, but forging one's own handwriting is risky. He paused, pressing the vellum gently. Observe the crease. It folds not in the center, but off to the right, suggesting it was folded double to fit into this narrow envelope. The writer needed a slender container, perhaps to slip through a locked door. Hastings frowned. A locked door. The front and garden doors were secured. Only a key or duplicate key could admit a visitor. Someone wielded such a key to leave this. He turned to Hastings, eyes alight. And who among us holds duplicate keys? Miss Sterling, returned Lady Millicent's key after dusting. Geraldine carried one. Carrington admitted desire to duplicate. Lord Blackwood and Thomas the butler have keys, of course, but only one needed this. Someone seeking a covert meeting. Hastings nodded slowly, and to orchestrate a frame for Carrington and Geraldine, Poirot smiled. Mon ami, the secret clue is that this note betrays premeditation. The culprit prepared the garden scene in advance, planting tokens to deflect suspicion, but in doing so, they left behind evidence of their own hand. He lifted the envelope. This envelope was slipped through the demi-lune window of Lady Millicent's study, the small, semicircular pane above the door. It lacks any adhesive slit. The flap is undisturbed. This indicates it was not sealed after insertion, but before, meaning the culprit had the envelope pre-sealed, Hastings remarked. Precisely. Poirot twirled the envelope between his fingers. They wrote the note, sealed it, then delivered it when the coast was clear. Hastings looked thoughtful. But whom were they addressing? If the note says meet me by the sundial, who is me? Poirot placed the envelope back on the table. That is our next question. Yet the greater truth lies in the fact that the note, the hairpin, and the glove form a chain of staged clues. By uncovering the provenance of the stationery and the distinctive handwriting, we strip away the deception and expose the culprit's reliance on misdirection. He turned away from the table and fixed Hastings with a determined gaze. Tonight, we must confront the suspects with this clue. Let us see whose composure cracks when challenged by their own carefully crafted ruse. Hastings closed his notebook. Shall we begin with Carrington? Poirot nodded. He is at the center of this storm, but we must present the evidence in a way that draws out the real villain, the one who thought to manipulate both Carrington and Geraldine as pawns. He picked up the hairpin drawing and the glove, placing them beside the note. With these 3 artifacts, Poirot declared, we hold the keys to unveiling the mind that orchestrated every misstep, and that mind grows more desperate by the hour. As the first servants arrived to clear away their meeting, Poirot and Hastings shared a silent acknowledgement. The secret clue had been found, and the path to justice lay open, though winding, and fraught with peril. In the coming hours, the murderer's fate would hinge on how they reacted when their own words were turned against them, and when the little grey cells revealed the truth behind their greatest deception. Chapter 11. Tensions. Rise by mid-afternoon, Blackwood Manor's atmosphere had become taut as a drawn bow. Word of Poirot's secret clue, the forged note, the monogrammed stationery, and the planted tokens had spread among the principal residents, and in hushed corridors and behind closed doors. Each suspect wrestled with anxiety and suspicion. It was time for Poirot to observe how their alliances would shift under pressure. He convened a meeting in the morning room adjoining the library. requesting the presence of Lord Blackwood, Geraldine Faraday, Edward Carrington, Penelope Sterling, and Lucien Devereux. Colonel Hastings arrived first, notebook in hand, followed by the suspects, each bearing the polite mask of composure, though their eyes betrayed varying degrees of unease. Poirot sat at the head of the long polished oak table, his posture erect, moustaches perfectly waxed into crescents of concentration. He motioned for them to be seated. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice calm yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. "We have uncovered evidence of a deliberate ruse intended to mislead Usa. Note forged upon Monsieur Carrington's paper, planted. Tokens belonging to Mademoiselle Faraday, and a staged strugline, the Rose Garden." He paused, allowing the gravity of the revelation to register. "Now I wish to see how you respond to this knowledge." He looked first to Edward Carrington. "Monsieur, you have indicated that you wished to duplicate Lady Millicent's key for her convenience. Yet here we find you as both victim and prime suspect. Tell us, why should we believe your innocence?" Carrington's face paled. He swallowed and cleared his throat. "I admit the evidence seems damning, but I had no hand in forging that note. Yes, I handled the stationery, but only to draft letters regarding estate matters. I would never resort to deception so crude." His hands trembled as he lifted a glass of water. Crude. Perhaps Poirot acknowledged, but effective in sowing doubt. He turned to Geraldine Faraday. "Mademoiselle, you were blamed for the glove and hairpin, yet we now know these items were staged. How do you explain your presence in the garden that night?" Geraldine's eyes filled with tears. "I went there to clear my mind, to escape the suffocating worry of family disputes. I dropped my hairpin truly by accident and nicked my wrist on a thorn. I swear I saw no one else." She paused, voice quavering. "Now I find myself framed for attempted violence. I do not know who would be so cruel." Poirot inclined his head sympathetically, then fixed his gaze on Penelope Sterling. "Madame, you returned Lady Millicent's key and discovered the safe's forced door. You claim you only sought to protect her possessions, yet you know the combination, and you move quietly through the manor by night. Do you deny involvement in either the threats or the theft?" Penelope's composure wavered. She clasped her hands in her lap and met Poirot's gaze. "I loved Lady Millicent as though she were my own kin. I would never betray her trust. I returned the key because I feared she might lose it. As for the theft of her codicil, I was in the greenhouse. At the time, tending to the orchids. The safe was intact when I left." Lucien Devereux, seated at the far end of the table, shifted in his chair and folded his arms. "I remain unconvinced that any of you speak falsehoods," he said, voice smooth yet laced with irony. "But let us not forget that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence." At that moment, Lord Blackwood's deep, measured voice interjected. "This parlour game of accusations accomplishes little. We have all been under scrutiny. None of us have perfect alibis. Yet only one among us wields the cunning to orchestrate such a diversion." Poirot raised a slender hand to forestall any further recriminations. "Patience, my lord. The little grey cells require observation, not interruption. We shall address the question of capacity shortly. First, I wish to test the strength of your alliances." He stood and walked to the tall window overlooking the rose garden. Through the glass, the sundial and dew-drenched paths lay bathed in pale light. Turning, he continued, "Last night at the ball we observed secret exchanges, Lord Blackwood with Miss Sterling, Miss Faraday with Lady Millicent. Monsieur Devereux with the butler. Shall we revisit those connections now, under the shadow of suspicion? Poirot gestured for Inspector Lewis to enter. The inspector carried a small tray, bearing cups of tea and coffee, which he placed upon the low table behind Poirot. Once the drinks were distributed, Poirot invited Carrington and Penelope Sterling to stand together. Messieurs, Poirot began, Monsieur Carrington, Madame Sterling, pray, demonstrate the nature of your alliance. He nodded toward Lord Blackwood and Penelope, for Hastings had informed him that she had warned Lord Blackwood of the morning's theft before anyone else was aware. Lord Blackwood rose and advanced toward Penelope. He paused beside her and spoke quietly, low enough for only her to hear. Penelope nodded, her expression grave, then turned toward Carrington and inclined her head. Carrington offered a curt nod in return. Poirot watched keenly. A tight alliance, he observed. They share information, protect mutual interests. He then directed attention to Geraldine Faraday. And you, mademoiselle, who is your staunchest ally? Geraldine glanced around the table, vulnerability in her eyes. She looked at Lady Millicent's empty chair and whispered, "My aunt was the only one I trusted." Tears welled. "But she has been a target hand. I fear her trust has been betrayed." She looked at Carrington with a questioning gaze, as though seeking reassurance from someone she once believed an ally. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Trust, once broken, corrodes swiftly. He then turned to Lucien Devereux. "Monsieur, you claimed no alliances, but you sought counsel from the butler. What counsel did you seek?" Devereux's jaw tightened. "I inquired whether the study was secured after midnight for an idea I had for a novel. I find authenticity in architectural detail." He paused, expression cool. "But beyond that, no alliance." Poirot's moustaches curled into a slight smile. "A lone wolf." Then he faced the entire group. "Now, we test your loyalties. Should I call upon you to defend another suspect who would stand forth in their defense?" He fixed his gaze on each in turn. Carrington hesitated, then remained silent. Penelope Sterling's lips pressed tight. She did not move. Geraldine's eyes flickered toward Lord Blackwood, who sat impassive. Lucien Devereux's arms tightened across his chest. Only Lord Blackwood himself rose. "I would defend Mademoiselle Faraday," he declared quietly. "She is family, and though we have our disputes, I know she would not harm her aunt." His steady tone carried more conviction than any protestation. Could Poirot let the moment hang and then addressed the group? "Contrast that with your own choices. In times of crisis, the bonds you choose to uphold reveal your heart's allegiance." He turned to Hastings. "Make a note, Lord Blackwood. Defends family above all." Others, silence. A murmur of tension swept the room as each suspect processed the implication. Poirot clasped his hands. "In my experience, those who speak out to protect another do so from genuine affection or shared culpability. Only time and further evidence tell which it is in this case." He walked to the hearth and picked up Hastings's notebook, flipping through pages of observations. "Tonight, we shall reconvene in the study, where I shall present each of you with a scenario based on your alliances. Your reactions will provide clarity." He placed the notebook upon the mantel. "Until then, I advise you to reflect upon whom you choose to defend and why." The suspects departed, their polite farewells tinged with frost. As the door closed, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The tensions have risen as expected. We see now who stands by whom and who stands alone. He tapped his chest. But the heart's true allegiance emerges under duress. And we have yet to apply that pressure. Hastings closed his notebook. By evening, we may know which bond is forged in steel and which in sand. Poirot smiled, satisfied. Yes, Hastings, for at Blackwood Manor, every secret is a strand and under tension. One will snap. And with that, the investigation moved into its most revealing phase, as the web of alliances strained under the weight of hidden truths and mounting suspicions. Chapter 12. The confrontation that evening. The lamps in the study burned low, casting a warm glow over the leather-bound volumes and the heavy oak desk where Lady Millicent's missing codicil had once been kept. Poirot had instructed each suspect to assemble at 8 o'clock sharp, under the pretext of reviewing the day's discoveries. They arrived one by one, hushed and tense. Lord Blackwood, Geraldine Faraday, Edward Carrington, Penelope Sterling, and Lucien Devereux. Inspector Lewis stood at the periphery, ready to intervene if necessary, while Colonel Hastings took position beside Poirot. Notebook poised. Mise Amos, Poirot began, voice measured. We gather now for a confrontation. Of sorts a test of truth under carefully applied pressure. He motioned toward the desk. Here lies a replica of Lady Millicent's codicil, painstakingly retyped from the surviving fragments and witness recollections. Tonight I shall proffer statements, and I require your frank responses. One among you knows more than you have. Admitted, and I intend to draw it out. He handed a folded sheet of paper to Lord Blackwood. Read this aloud, si vous plaît. Lord Blackwood unfolded the sheet and read in his resonant baritone, I, Millicent Blackwood, amend my will to bequeath half of my estate to my niece, Geraldine Faraday, should anything befall me. He refolded the paper and returned it to Poirot. The group shifted uncomfortably. Poirot turned to Geraldine. Mademoiselle, you were named in the codicil, yet you claim ignorance of its contents. Admit, did you read it when you retrieved the packet? Geraldine's eyes widened. She pressed her fingers to her lips. I glimpsed the name, yes, but I did not read the terms. I wished only to confirm its existence. Poirot inclined his head, fearful that knowledge would weigh upon you. Perhaps you feared responsibility. Geraldine shook her head. No, I feared only that someone would steal it. Indeed, Poirot's gaze shifted to Carrington. Monsieur Carrington, you discovered the missing amount in Lady Millicent's account, and fear of discovery was your motive. Yet you offered financial advice this afternoon as though nothing untoward had occurred. Tell me, did you attempt to replace the codicil after its removal? Carrington's hand trembled around his glass of port. He swallowed visibly. I considered it. If I could find a copy, I might restore her wishes. Poirot's eyebrows rose. A noble thought if true. But you did not act, did you? Carrington's shoulders slumped. No, I feared detection. Fear, again, Poirot murmured. Fear drives action or inaction. He turned to Penelope Sterling. Madame, you returned the key to Lady Millicent's reticule last night, yet you knew the combination was at risk. Why did you not safeguard it further? Penelope's lips quivered. I thought only to restore order. I did not wish to alarm her. Alarms can prevent disaster. Poirot observed. Did you share your concerns with anyone? She hesitated, then whispered, I told Lord Blackwood. A flicker crossed Lord Blackwood's face. He inclined his head. You sought guidance. Indeed, Poirot said. And did that guidance lead to the theft of the codicil? He let the question linger. Lord Blackwood's lips tightened. I gave no counsel to commit crime, yet you did nothing to prevent it, Poirot noted. Inaction is a choice. The group stirred. Poirot's voice softened. Now, Monsieur Devereux. He produced another sheet, read this aloud. Devereux took the paper and read, To protect the house's legacy, any attempt on my life or theft of my codicil shall result in the revelation of a secret that none here suspect. He handed the sheet back. His face was pale. Poirot fixed him with a steady gaze. A threat written in the hand of Lady Millicent, yet the paper matches the monogrammed stationery of Carrington. How came you into possession of this sheet? Devereux's forehead glistened. He swallowed. I found it on her desk this morning, half-burned. I took it for safekeeping. Rounded. Poirot pressed. Or did you plant it? Devereux's composure frayed. I would not, he protested. I sought proof of her intentions, nothing more. Poirot's moustaches twitched with interest. Proof can be dangerous, monsieur. He paused, then continued. Finally, Lord Blackwood. He slid a final sheet across the desk. Read. Lord Blackwood read. Trust no one, for in the heart of a family lies the capacity for the gravest betrayal. He refolded the sheet and replaced it in Poirot's hand. His expression remained impassive, yet his voice trembled slightly. Dark words, he said. Dark indeed, Poirot agreed. Written in Lady Millicent's diary, I suspect. He looked around the table. Now these statements provoke reflections on motive and opportunity. But it is time for the crucible. A hypothetical. He drew a breath. Imagine, Mies Amos, that I am the culprit, and you must persuade me to confess. Each of you has 1 minute to address me, appealing to conscience, fear, or reason. Speak directly and do not hesitate. Geraldine rose first, stepping forward. Monsieur Poirot, she began, voice quivering, if you are the thief, know that your actions betray love and trust. The inheritance you protect so dearly will mean nothing if wrought through deception. Confess, and you may yet preserve your integrity. She sank back, trembling, as Poirot inclined his head. Carrington stood next. Hands clasped behind his back, he spoke in a hushed tone. Monsieur Poirot, consider the cost of your fear. A forced will binds no one's conscience. Confess, and allow Lady Millicent to make her desires known. Only truth can free a trapped soul. Penelope Sterling approached with demure grace. Monsieur Poirot, revelations need not destroy. They can heal. I implore you to end this web of lies and set us all free. Lucien Devereux followed, voice low yet firm. Monsieur Poirot, you pride yourself on logic. Yet logic demands precision, not subterfuge. Admit your hand and spare us the torment of doubt. Finally, Lord Blackwood stepped forward. His voice was steady. Hercule, you know me. I have dedicated my life to this family's honor. If you have betrayed that honor, let us end this dishonor now. Each appeal hung in the charged silence. Poirot closed his eyes, letting the echoes of their words resonate. After a moment, he opened them and surveyed the group. Mercy, he said softly, your words are potent, as are your motives. Yet the one who speaks from the heart betrays their own guilt most unwillingly. He paused, then raised a finger. One of you hesitated longer than the others, and one spoke from fear rather than hope. He turned first to Carrington. Your appeal was eloquent, yet you spoke of trapped souls, an allusion to the key and the coded fear you planted. I detect in your words the echo of your own note. Carrington's face went ashen. Poirot then addressed Geraldine. Yours sprang from love, yet your tears were too readily summoned. Love is patient, not panicked, she gasped softly. To Penelope Sterling, he said, your plea was gentle, yet too rehearsed. A governess who learned secrets would beg forgiveness with sincerity, not with such polished compassion. Penelope's lips parted, but she said nothing. To Lucien Devereux, Poirot continued. Your words dripped with theatricality fitting for a novelist, not for one seeking redemption. Devereux's hands clenched at his sides. Finally, Poirot turned to Lord Blackwood. And you, my lord, spoke with measured cadence, invoking honour, yet your eyes flickered with doubt. Honour, when truly held, shines unwavering. Lord Blackwood's mouth tightened but remained closed. Poirot folded his hands. Now, one of you holds the truth in your heart. One of you knows that the theft, the threats, and the diversions all originated with your hand. And when I ask, confess. Only the guilty will quake at that word. He let his gaze linger on each dot. Silence filled the study. The clock ticked loudly. At length, it was Penelope Sterling who broke the stillness. Her voice trembled. Monsieur Poirot, if confessions fall from my lips, will Lady Millicent's codicil be restored? Poirot inclined his head. Restitution begins with truth. Penelope swallowed. Her eyes filled, and she took a trembling step forward. I handled Lady Millicent's diary combination. I gave it to Lord Blackwood because I believed he could protect her. I never intended harm, only to safeguard her wishes. She faltered, but then I saw the note, and I feared someone would use it to destroy her life. I tried to cover up what I knew. Her voice broke. She covered her face. I did not steal the codicil. I did not plant the glove or hairpin. But I did forge the note to draw Edward Carrington into danger, to distract from my betrayal of trust. Gasps filled the room. Carrington stepped back, eyes wide. Geraldine's face paled. Lord Blackwood's brow creased in disappointment. Devereux's mouth opened and closed. Hastings looked astonished. Expression remained composed. Madame, he said softly, you have confessed not to the theft, but to the act of misdirection, a grave transgression. Yet the true crime remains. Inspector Lewis moved forward. Penelope Sterling, you are under arrest for forging that note and staging the garden confrontation. However, the theft of the codicil and the direct threat lie unresolved. Penelope's shoulders slumped, tears sliding down her cheeks. I only meant to protect her. Poirot's gaze was gentle yet firm. Protection through deceit begets worse harm, but now we see more clearly. The path narrows to those who desired not only to distract, but to destroy, to remove the codicil, and to frighten Lady Millicent before they struck. He turned to the remaining four. Our investigation moves to its climax. One of you is the author of those darker deeds. Soon the final pieces will fall into place. As Penelope was led away, the air in the study crackled with tension. Alliances shattered, and a suspect had broken under pressure, yet the murderer was still at large, their identity cloaked in deeper shadows. Poirot pressed his lips together and whispered to Hastings, the confrontation has unearthed a plot within a plot. Now, Hastings, we must follow the final thread. And with that, the stage was set for the ultimate reveal and the justice that awaited at the end of Poirot's relentless inquiry. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. Shortly after midnight, a tense stillness settled over Blackwood Manor. The lamps in the entrance hall cast long shadows, and a lone wind rattled the leaded windows. Colonel Hastings, on Poirot's instructions, kept vigil near the front door, while the rest of the household slumbered under strict orders to remain in their rooms. Poised at the top of the grand staircase, Poirot listened intently for any sound. Of movement below, a soft click echoed through the hall, the bolt on the service door being withdrawn. Moments later, footsteps padded across the marble floor, growing louder as they approached the main entrance. Hastings signalled to Poirot, and together they slipped into the corridor, their silhouettes merging with the darkness. At the foot of the stairs, they stopped behind a wide pillar, peering around the edge. There, in the pale glow of the hallway lamp, stood Edward Carrington, clutching a small leather satchel. His face was pale, beads of sweat glinting on his brow. He glanced nervously over his shoulder as he fitted a duplicate key into the lock of the front door. Carrington's hand trembled, and the key caught. He cursed softly and bent to adjust it. Hastings raised his voice in warning. "Monsieur Carrington, I believe you have something to tell us." Startled, Carrington jerked upright. The key turned, and the door creaked open. He shoved the satchel under his arm and took a step toward freedom. Poirot emerged from the shadows, hands folded behind his back, moustaches quivering with quiet disapproval. "Ah, Monsieur Carrington," Poirot said gently, "you planned to leave us so soon." Carrington's face twisted in panic. He backed away, knocking Hastings's notebook from the banister. Papers fluttered to the floor. I cannot stay here," he stammered. "They'll never return my position if the codicil remains." He hesitated, voice cracking. "I must deliver it to Lady Millicent's solicitors before dawn." "It's in the satchel." Hastings moved to block the door. "The codicil was destroyed in the fire. Nothing remains." Carrington's eyes darted to the satchel. He looked down at it as though seeing it for the first time, then realized Poirot's presence. "You know nothing," he hissed, stepping forward. "Let me pass." Poirot inclined his head. "I know you fear exposure, but flight will not absolve you. Return the satchel, and we shall speak of your intentions." Carrington lunged toward the door, but Hastings intercepted him. The satchel slipped from Carrington's grasp and clattered to the floor. He bent to retrieve it, then froze at the sight of its contents spilled upon the carpet. Legal papers. A sealed envelope addressed to a London law firm, and beneath them, fragment of parchment bearing Lady Millicent's crest. Poirot moved calmly to the papers. Ah, a backup codicil, perhaps. He picked up the fragment and compared it to the retyped version on his desk. Indeed, another copy. His eyes met Carrington's. "You stole this when you retrieved the original, did you not?" Carrington's shoulders sagged. I needed to ensure her wishes stood. The original was gone. I thought if I delivered this, I could restore order. His voice was a mixture of desperation and shame. But when I saw how tightly the investigation circled, I panicked. Hastings clenched his jaw. "Panic led you to steal again, to attempt escape." Carrington's gaze fell. "I only wished to do the right thing." Poirot studied him with compassion. "Right and wrong can be tangled in fear, mon ami." He gestured to the satchel. "Hand over these papers. We shall verify their authenticity, and if they are genuine, we can reinstate the codicil without scandal." Carrington hesitated, then sank to his knees and scooped up the papers. He handed them to Poirot, who slid them into his coat pocket. Hastings retrieved the leather satchel and closed the door firmly. The lock clicked home. Before Carrington could rise, A soft footfall sounded behind him. Geraldine Faraday, summoned by the disturbance, appeared at the top of the stairs, her nightdress gathered at her waist. Her eyes were rimmed with tears. "Edward," she cried, "what have you done?" Carrington looked up at her, anguish etched on his face. "I tried to save us, Geraldine, but everything has gone awry." Geraldine hastened down the steps. "Let me help," she pleaded. "Please." She reached out, but Carrington recoiled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought I could fix it. I was wrong." Poirot cleared his throat gently. "Mademoiselle, your concern is touching, but this matter must be resolved by proper channels." He turned to Hastings. "Call Inspector Lewis. We shall bring this to Lady Millicent at once." Hastings nodded and hurried away. Carrington rose shakily to his feet, and Geraldine slipped an arm round his waist, her tears dampening his coat sleeve. They stood together beneath the lamp's glow, a tableau of remorse and fear. Poirot watched them for a moment, then spoke softly. "The desperate attempt has ended. Yet our investigation is not complete. There remains one more web to unravel before the true culprit is behind bars." He led the pair back toward the drawing-room, where a warm fire awaited, and where, despite the late hour, Lady Millicent would insist on hearing every detail. Outside, the night wind sighed through the eaves, as if carrying away the echoes of Carrington's failed flight and whispering promises of the revelations yet to come. In the hush of the corridor, Hastings returned with Inspector Lewis. The constable's lantern cast a steady glow as he surveyed the scene and placed Carrington under a cautious but compassionate arrest for theft. Geraldine stepped forward, offering to vouch for his character, but Lewis shook his head. "We must follow the evidence, Miss Faraday. You may remain for Lady Millicent's comfort." Poirot inclined his head. "Thank you, Inspector. Now, let us inform Lady Millicent and prepare for the final piece of the puzzle." He paused outside the drawing-room door, steepled his fingers, and murmured to Hastings, "The true culprit will not be far behind." As they entered to share the events of the night, the manor's shadows seemed to retreat, revealing cracks in the facade of civility, cracks through which the ultimate truth would soon burst. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. Quiet of dawn had settled over Blackwood Manor when Colonel Hastings roused Hercule Poirot with brisk urgency. "Monsieur, I have discovered something in Monsieur Devereux's study," Hastings whispered as they hurried down the corridor. A fragment of parchment, torn from Lady Millicent's diary, hidden beneath his writing desk. Poirot's moustaches twitched with interest. "Lead the way, Hastings." In Lucien Devereux's study, the morning light slanted through tall windows onto rows of leather-bound books and a finely wrought writing desk. Hastings crossed the room and knelt, retrieving a small, ragged scrap stained faintly with ink. On it were two words in Lady Millicent's elegant hand. "My secret." "Look," Monsieur Hastings said, handing the fragment to Poirot. "It matches the handwriting of the recovered diary pages." Poirot studied the scrap with his pince-nez. Indeed, he placed it beside the folded vellum of Carrington's forged note and the other clues. "This fragment completes our evidence. Triad. It ties Monsieur Devereux directly to the stolen diary." Hastings's brow furrowed. But why hide it here? And why tear out only these words? Because our culprit assumed no one would suspect a novelist of direct theft. He believed misdirection planting hairpins, forging notes would suffice. Yet he overlooked the simple need to destroy all evidence. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Instead, he concealed this, intending to remove it later, an incomplete plan born of overconfidence. He rose and looked through the window at the dew-damp gardens. Now, Hastings, we possess the final piece. A diary fragment in the hand of Lady Millicent, found hidden in his private study. That, coupled with his earlier alliance with the butler, and his furtive questions about the locked drawing-room, reveals his true ambition. Hastings placed a hand on the desk. Shall we confront him at once? Not yet, Poirot replied, his tone gentle but firm. Let us first secure this fragment and its placement in evidence. Then, at the proper moment, we shall draw him into the circle for the reveal. He turned to Hastings with a conspiratorial nod. Inform Inspector Lewis that we require Monsieur Devereux's presence in the drawing-room at 9 this evening. There, with all assembled, we shall watch the final piece fall into place. That afternoon, Poirot convened his remaining Blackwood, Geraldine Faraday, and the recently exonerated Penelope Sterling in the grand drawing-room. The fire blazed in the hearth, casting dancing light upon the portraits of Blackwood ancestors lining the walls. Lady Millicent sat between them, her expression resolute, while Hastings and Inspector Lewis took discreet positions behind a velvet settee. Monsieur Devereux will join us shortly, Poirot announced. We have discovered another clue. That completes the narrative of our mystery. He paused, letting anticipation build. A fragment of Lady Millicent's diary was found concealed in his study, bearing words that were never meant to leave this room. Geraldine gasped softly, clutching the arm of her chair. Lord Blackwood's brow darkened. Penelope Sterling leaned forward, eyes bright with concern. Lord Blackwood broke the silence. You suggest that the novelist stole from his hostess? Merely stole, Poirot corrected. He sought to weaponize her own words against her. He turned to Lady Millicent. Would you care to confirm the fragment's authenticity, madame? Lady Millicent reached out and took the scrap from Poirot, holding it to the light. Yes, she said softly. These are my words. I wrote them when I first discovered the plot against my will. Her gaze flicked to the door. Lucien had no right to read these private thoughts. At that moment, the door opened, and Lucien Devereux entered. His usual suave demeanour wavered as he saw the assembled company and the fragment held aloft. Poirot rose to greet him. Monsieur Devereux, please join us. He motioned to an empty chair. Devereux's shoulders tensed, and he sat slowly, fingers brushing the armrest as if uncertain of its solidity. Poirot addressed him directly. Monsieur, earlier you sought confirmation of the study's locks at midnight. You conversed with the butler after the ball. You penned a sheet of Lady Millicent's private warnings to manipulate her niece and her steward. Now we find that you also removed and concealed a portion of her diary here. Devereux's face paled. His voice trembled as he rose. I only wished to understand her motivations, to capture authenticity for my novel. I thought, if I could read her words, I might appraise her character. Character appraisals, Poirot replied, do not justify theft, nor framing of others. He gestured to the fragment on the table. This scrap proves you travelled far beyond mere observation. You pilfered her manuscript, her confessions, to wield them as blackmail. Geraldine stood. You betrayed my aunt's trust. You used her secrets to harm those she loved. Devereux's eyes darted to Hastings, then to Penelope, as though seeking an ally. None moved. Why? Poirot asked. Why direct suspicion onto Carrington and my poor friend, Miss Sterling? Why the glove, the hairpin, the forged note? Devereux ran a hand through his hair. I was desperate for inspiration, for notoriety. I saw that Millicent's revelations would scandalize high society. If I controlled them, I would write a story no publisher could refuse. Lady Millicent's eyes filled. You stole my grief for your profit. Devereux sank back into his chair. I am sorry, never meant for it to go so far. Poirot nodded. Regret is a start, monsieur, but only truth absolves. Admit your crimes fully, and justice may temper your punishment. Devereux's shoulders slumped. He exhaled slowly. I confess. I stole the diary fragment. I planted the glove and hairpin Thomas led you towards Lady Millicent. Family and staff. I forged Carrington's note. I forced open the safe to see the codicil's contents, though. I did not remove it tanned. I orchestrated this chaos for my own gain. A hush fell as his words settled. Inspector Lewis stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Devereux's shoulder. Monsieur, you are under arrest for theft, forgery, and conspiracy. As Devereux was led away, the assembled group let out a collective sigh of relief, regret, and exhaustion. Poirot turned to Lady Millicent. Your privacy and your legacy restored, madame. Lady Millicent rose and embraced her niece. Geraldine wept softly on her shoulder. Lord Blackwood offered a solemn nod of respect. Penelope Sterling curtsied, tears in her eyes. Colonel Hastings closed his notebook with a satisfied smile. Poirot surveyed the scene with quiet pride. The puzzle is complete. The final piece, the stolen diary fragment, fell into place only when misdirection could no longer conceal the culprit. He tapped his temple lightly, and thus the little grey cells prevail. In the hush that followed, the first rays of morning sun filtered through the windows, illuminating the triumphant calm of justice served and the promise of peace returning to Blackwood Manor. Chapter 15. Outcome and justice, with Lucien Devereux safely in custody and the missing codicil recovered. The atmosphere of Blackwood Manor shifted from tense apprehension to sober relief. In the great drawing room, Lady Millicent presided over a small gathering of those most intimately involved. Her niece, Geraldine Faraday, Lord Alistair Blackwood, Edward Carrington, Penelope Sterling, Hercule Poirot, Colonel Hastings, and Inspector Lewis. A single lamp cast a warm glow over their assembled forms, illuminating faces lined with exhaustion, remorse, or hard-won tranquility. Lady Millicent rose and addressed the group in a steady voice. I thank you all for your patience, for your honesty in the end. The codicil is once again in its rightful place, and the integrity of my will is preserved. She held the genuine codicil aloft, its parchment pristine, the Blackwood crest gleaming. My estate shall pass, as I intended, to Geraldine and to the charitable foundations I named. Geraldine, seated beside her aunt, dabbed at her eyes with a lace kerchief. I am honoured, Aunt Millicent, she said softly, and profoundly grateful for your faith in me, despite my unwitting involvement in these events. Lady Millicent smiled, placing a hand upon Geraldine's. You were young and frightened. Let this be a lesson in discretion and in courage. Lord Blackwood, seated opposite, inclined his head. My nephew, Edward Carrington, proved himself trustworthy in the end, despite his desperate actions. He turned to Carrington. Your efforts to safeguard the codicil even by ill-advised means loyalty to the family. Carrington, drained of colour but steady in posture, bowed. I apologize for my recklessness, my lord. I should have come to you or to Madame Millicent directly. Lady Millicent waved away his apology with a gentle gesture. Your intentions were pure. though your methods were flawed. I bear you no ill will. Penelope Sterling stood next. I am humbled to have been forgiven, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I never meant to deceive, only to protect those I love. Geraldine reached across to take Penelope's hand. Your loyalty and compassion were a comfort to us all. Penelope's eyes glistened as she sat. Poirot rose and adjusted his gloves with his characteristic precision. Madame, messieurs, we have reached the juncture where justice and mercy converge. Monsieur Devereux will face the consequences of his actions, lawful restitution for theft and forgery, yet it is my hope that this affair strengthens the bonds of trust within this household. Inspector Lewis stepped forward, his notebook closed. Madame, I will ensure that your codicil is delivered to your solicitors in London first thing tomorrow, and I shall oversee the necessary procedures to discharge Monsieur Devereux's obligations. Hastings, standing behind Poirot, added, The manor shall return to its peaceful rhythms, though tempered by the knowledge of how fragile that peace can be. A reflective silence followed. Then Lady Millicent crossed to a side table and poured tea. For each of her guests, the gentle clink of porcelain, an unlikely counterpoint to the evening's drama. As they sipped, conversation drifted toward trivialities. The delayed spring blooms in the garden, plans for the summer's charity bazaar, and the upcoming family portrait by the manor's widest window. Geraldine caught her aunt's eye and offered a tentative smile. Perhaps, aunt, we should commission the portrait now while our memories of this trial are fresh, as a reminder that even the closest of bonds can weather adversity. Lady Millicent returned the smile with warmth. An excellent idea, my dear. Let this portrait capture not merely our likenesses, but the strength of our family's unity. Lord Blackwood fancied a quiet chuckle, and perhaps remind us all to keep our secrets well guarded. Laughter rippled through the room, easing the last tensions. Even Carrington managed a small grin, and Penelope's shoulders relaxed. Poirot permitted himself a satisfied nod, his little grey cells content that the threads of mystery had been woven back into a tapestry of order. As the evening drew to a close, the guests rose. Lady Millicent kissed Geraldine's forehead and embraced Penelope. Lord Blackwood shook Carrington's hand with measured warmth. Inspector Lewis offered his final courtesies before tipping his hat. Colonel Hastings stood by the door, ready to bid each good night. Poirot lingered, gathering his gloves and hat. Lady Millicent regarded him with gratitude. Monsieur Poirot, you have done more than solve a crime. You have restored harmony to this home. Poirot bowed, moustaches quivering in modest pride. It is always my great pleasure to employ the little grey cells on behalf of justice and goodwill. With that, he departed down the lamplit corridor, followed by Hastings, leaving Blackwood Manor at peace under the watchful gaze of dawn's first light. The case of the locked diary drawer concluded with all debts moral, legal, and familial fully repaid, and the promise of new beginnings resting gently upon its venerable stones. And so, as the manor settled into quiet, one truth remained. In the artful dance between deception and revelation, it is the steadfast heart and the indomitable mind that guides justice to its rightful end. Chapter 16. The closing remark with the dawn sun climbing higher over the manicured lawns of Blackwood Manor. The household gathered in the grand foyer to bid their guests, and guests in or deed, farewell. Lady Millicent, radiant in a simple morning gown of dove-grey silk, greeted each visitor with warmth restored, her composure a testament to the trials they had all endured. Geraldine stood by her side, now secure in her inheritance and her place. in the family's esteem. Colonel Hastings exchanged polite banter with the remaining staff, and Inspector Lewis prepared to depart, his notes complete and the culprits in proper hands. Hercule Poirot, standing at the foot of the sweeping staircase, surveyed the scene with a serene air of triumph, his moustaches curled with satisfaction, and the lines at the corners of his keen eyes softened perhaps with gratitude for a case so deftly resolved. He held his silk hat in one hand and the impeccably folded morning coat draped across his arm, poised to step into the awaiting carriage. Lord Alistair Blackwood approached, his customary reserve softened by genuine respect. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, voice steady, "I cannot thank you enough for restoring both my niece's peace of mind and my family's honour." Poirot inclined his head graciously. "It has been a most engaging puzzle, my lord, one that tested every nuance of the little grey cells. But the true pleasure lies in seeing justice served and harmony restored." Adjacent to Lord Blackwood, Edward Carrington offered a slightly more awkward but heartfelt expression of gratitude. "Your guidance prevented me from a life of exile, Monsieur Poirot. I have learned that sometimes the path of honesty, though fraught with peril, leads to redemption." Poirot tapped his chest lightly. "Redemption, mon ami, is the sweetest fruit born of courage." Penelope Sterling drew nearer, her governess's poise regained yet now tinged with humility. "You taught me that true protection comes not from secrecy, but from truth, monsieur." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Yes, madame, secrets buried grow roots that strangle the heart. Truth, however, is a garden in which forgiveness may bloom." Across the foyer, Geraldine Faraday stepped forward, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, you have been my guide through darkness. I shall remember your kindness always." He smiled, placing a gloved hand over his heart. "Mademoiselle, your bravery and honesty lightened my task. Remember, even the smallest revelations can banish the greatest shadows." A distant rumble announced the approach of the carriage that would carry Poirot back to London. The butler appears and bows respectfully. Lady Millicent herself took his arm, summoning her courage to accompany the detective just steps beyond the threshold. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "before you leave us, may I ask for one final thought on what justice truly means?" Poirot paused, looking out toward the dew-sparkled garden where petals glistened in the morning light. For a moment he seemed to withdraw into contemplation, the bustle of departure falling away as though encased in crystal. Then, lifting his gaze, he spoke in a voice both gentle and resolute. "Justice is not merely the application of law, dear Madame. It is the restoration of balance, balancing fear with courage, deception with truth, and malice with mercy. To achieve it, one must harmonize the head with the heart, for reason alone can guide us to the threshold of justice, but compassion alone guides us through its door." Lady Millicent smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. She pressed Poirot's arm in gratitude. At that moment, the carriage drew up. Colonel Hastings offered his arm to the detective, and together they stepped across the threshold. The heavy doors of Blackwood Manor closed with a soft thud behind them, severing the ties to the drama that had unfolded within its walls. In the carriage, Poirot surveyed his surroundings, the polished mahogany panels, the upholstered seats, and the faint reflection of Hastings's concerned but admiring face in the window glass. He adjusted his cravat and, with a characteristic flourish, spoke once more. "Now, Hastings, as the wheels carry us away, I must say that the greatest mystery is not in the mechanics of crime, but in the human heart. for it is there we find the capacity for both darkness and light sometimes in the same individual, and it is our duty as dreamers of order to coax that light forth." Hastings nodded, scribbling final notes in his leather-bound journal. "You always find such poetic words, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Poetry, mon ami, is simply logic clothed in beauty." As the carriage rumbled away from the gates of Blackwood Manor, the morning sun rose fully, illuminating the stately facade and the gardens beyond. Behind them lay secrets laid bare, alliances tested, and justice achieved. Ahead lay London's bustling streets, and with them the promise of another mystery awaiting the keen mind of Hercule Poirot and the steadfast companionship of his dear friend Hastings. In that carriage, as the world unfolded beyond the glass, Poirot closed his eyes for a brief moment and allowed himself a small, contented sigh. The case of the locked diary drawer had reached its satisfying conclusion. But in life, much like in detective work, there were always more puzzles to solve, more hearts to understand, and more dances between deception and truth to witness. And so, with the carriage's steady rhythm beneath him and Hastings's pen scratching softly at his side, Hercule Poirot set forth toward his next adventure, ever guided by the conviction that the greatest mysteries are solved not by force, but by the exquisite balance of mind and heart. Thus ends this part of our tale, and thus ever onward marches the unyielding march of justice. Chapter 17. A farewell to Chabelazin. The days following the resolution of the locked diary drawer affair, Blackwood Manor returned to its accustomed rhythms. Those subtle echoes of recent turmoil lingered in its corridors. The early morning mist still curled around the rose garden's sundial, now restored to calm dignity, and the halls once so heavy with suspicion resounded once more with quiet footsteps and the soft murmur of domestic life. Lady Millicent sat in the conservatory one late afternoon, sunlight filtering through the glass panes and warming the ferns at her feet. She cradled a cup of chamomile tea, her gaze drifting over the repaired leather packet containing her precious codicil. Geraldine joined her, carrying a small bouquet of lavender picked from the terrace, its purple sprigs bright against her pale blue dress. "My dear Lady Millicent," said softly, taking the flowers, "how do you find the peace now that the shadows have lifted?" Geraldine perched upon a nearby wicker seat. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and smiled, with gentle assurance. "I feel stronger for having faced fear, Aunt, and I am grateful for you, for Penelope's kindness, and for Monsieur Poirot's guidance." Lady Millicent inclined her head. "You have shown resilience beyond your years." She paused, then added, "Would you consider joining me in overseeing the charity I mentioned? Your insight would be invaluable." Geraldine's eyes shone. "I would be honored." As they spoke, Penelope Sterling moved among the potted orchids, tending each bloom with a tender hand. Her governess's presence no longer carried the weight of misdirection. Instead, there was a serene focus in her every movement. She glanced toward the duo and offered a soft smile, unspoken greeting that spoke of renewed trust. Across the hall, Lord Alistair Blackwood consulted with Edward Carrington in the library. Carrington held a sheaf of property, ledgers, and charity endorsements, both now correctly reflecting Lady Millicent's amended will. Lord Blackwood's deep voice rumbled with contentment. "Your acumen has served us well, Edward. Let us see to it that the charitable foundations flourish as you envisioned." Carrington nodded. "I shall draft the first report this week, my lord. It is a relief to apply my energies to something positive rather than fear." Outside, Colonel Hastings wandered the rose garden, notebook in hand, capturing the morning's light upon the dewy lawn in careful sketches. He paused beside the sundial, recalling how it had stood witness to so many stage diversions. He pressed a fingertip to the cool stone, as though acknowledging its role in the mystery. "You have done well, Hastings," a quiet voice from behind said. Poirot stood upon the garden path, his moustaches twitching in an approving smile. He wore a simple travelling coat, ready for their imminent departure. Hastings smiled and closed his notebook. "Another case neatly concluded, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot nodded, glancing at the sprawling manor beyond the white pillars. "Yes, yet even now, the manor breathes with life restored. The shadows retreat, but their lessons remain." He surveyed Hastings with thoughtful intensity. "Tell me, do you believe the human heart ever truly sheds its shadows?" Hastings considered. "Perhaps not entirely, but with truth as our guide, the burden lightens." "Ah, perfectly said, mon ami." Poirot's eyes crinkled with approval. "Now, let us rejoin Lady Millicent and the others. The time approaches for my return to London." They walked together along the gravel path, the stillness of the garden, punctuated only by the distant chime of the grandfather clock within the manor. The scent of lavender and rose hung in the air, a fragrant testament to renewal. Inside the drawing-room, Lady Millicent had summoned the household to bid farewell to Poirot and Hastings. Penelope Sterling stood near the hearth, holding a small porcelain dish of sugared almonds, a traditional token of good fortune. Geraldine lingered beside her aunt, her expression wistful at the impending departure of their saviours. Poirot paused in the centre of the room, glancing from face to face. Lady Millicent's serene countenance, Geraldine's grateful eyes, Lord Blackwood's nod of respect, Carrington's earnest bow, and Penelope's gentle curtsy. He raised a slender hand. "My friends," he began, "we gather one final time to mark the end of this chapter in Blackwood Manor's history. This house has seen the full spectrum of human emotion, fear, betrayal, love, and redemption. Yet through it all, you remained steadfast companions." Lady Millicent stepped forward and pressed a small box into Poirot's hands. "Monsieur, as a token of our gratitude, please accept this a ring of amethyst set in silver, reflecting the balance between darkness and light." Poirot's moustaches twitched in surprise and delight as he opened the box. He slipped the ring onto his little finger, gesture unusual yet heartfelt. "Merci, madame. I shall wear it always as a reminder of Blackwood's triumph of truth." He turned to Hastings. "And you, mon ami, will continue to chronicle our adventures, ensuring these lessons endure." Hastings smiled. "I will indeed, Poirot." The carriage whistles sounded from the courtyard below. Guests gathered their coats and hats, preparing for the journey back to London. As they filed out to the entrance hall, Lord Blackwood offered a final farewell. "Safe travels, Monsieur Poirot, and know that Blackwood Manor's doors remain open to you." Geraldine embraced Hastings. "Thank you, Colonel, for your steadfast support." Penelope placed a single sugared almond upon a small saucer at Poirot's feet. "May your path be sweet and confusions few." Poirot picked up the almond and tucked it into his pocket, a smile beneath his immaculate moustaches. "Your sweetness and decorum shall not be forgotten, madame." In the grand doorway, Lady Millicent and Geraldine watched as Poirot and Hastings stepped into the morning light. The carriage wheels turned, rising in a gentle cloud of dust as it made its way down the drive. Lady Millicent raised her hand in farewell, and Geraldine echoed the gesture, hand pressed to her heart. Poirot waved his cane. Au revoir, Blackwood Manorant, till our paths cross again. As the carriage rounded the final bend, Hastings leaned forward. One more reflection, Monsieur, on the nature of justice and mercy. Poirot's eyes glinted. Justice, Hastings, is the song of the human spirit made audible. Mercy is the refrain that gives it its beauty. Hastings nodded, pen poised for his final note. Outside, the sun shone fully upon Blackwood Manor, where shadows had been banished at last stand, where the promise of a brighter morrow awaited all who dwelt within its stately walls. Thus concludes our journey through intrigue and revelation, leaving behind a legacy of truth and the enduring wisdom of the little grey cells. Chapter 18. The promise of tomorrow weeks later. A golden autumn light filtered through the tall windows of Blackwood Manor's library, where Lady Millicent, Geraldine, Faraday, Edward Carrington, Penelope Sterling, and Colonel Hastings had gathered for a quiet reunion. The once storm-tossed household now thrummed with purposeful activity. The charity in Geraldine's name was flourishing. Carrington had devised a sound financial plan. Penelope had organized a children's reading circle in the village, and Hastings, ever the faithful chronicler, held aloft his latest bound manuscript, the case of the locked diary drawer ready for presentation. Lady Millicent, seated at her favourite writing desk, looked upon her circle with both pride and gratitude. She tapped her quill against the open page of her ledger. "I confess," she said with a gentle laugh, "that I had not anticipated so many worthwhile endeavours springing from my misfortunes." Geraldine rose to pour tea in delicate china cups inscribed with the Blackwood crest. "Adversity often uncovers hidden strengths," she replied, handing a cup to her aunt and one to Carrington. "I know I have found courage I did not know one possessed." Carrington accepted the tea with a shy bow. "And I have learned humility, which I dare say is the foundation of true stewardship." Penelope Sterling arranged a small stack of illustrated volumes on the side table. "I have children to thank," she said softly, "for teaching me that innocence thrives on honesty." She glanced at Geraldine. "Thank you for believing in me." Geraldine squeezed her hand. "And thank you for guiding me when I wavered." "Colonel." Hastings cleared his throat, adjusting his jacket with militaristic precision. "Gentlemen and ladies, if I may be so bold, I present to you my completed chronicle of our recent affair." He laid the leather-bound volume on the table, a record not only of clues and counter-clues, but of hearts tested and bonds reforged. Lady Millicent pressed a fingertip to the cover. "It is beautifully done, Colonel." She looked up, eyes shining, a testament to the enduring power of truth and friendship. At that moment, the library door opened on slender, purposeful footsteps and in swept Hercule Poirot himself, his waxed moustaches curling further at the ends, and an air of triumphant satisfaction about him. He carried no hat nor coat, as though the warmth of their reunion was more than sufficient cloak against any chill. Mise Amos. Poirot greeted them, bowing in his characteristic fashion. "I hope I am not intruding upon a moment of serenity." Geraldine rose with a beaming smile. "Monsieur Poirot, you are always welcome." Lady Millicent patted the chair beside her. "Please, join us. Your presence completes this circle of gratitude." Poirot settled gracefully into the offered seat, folding his gloved hands upon his lap. He regarded each face in turn, the aunt and niece, the steward, the governess. and the chronicler with palpable warmth. "I return to London in 3 days," he announced, "but before I depart, I wished to share a few final observations." He paused, lifting one manicured finger. "First, in every mystery there exists a dual path, one of deception, the other of redemption. Yesterday's shadows yield to today's hope when truth is embraced." He sipped from his cup, eyes misting with quiet emotion. "Second, a family's true legacy is not its wealth or its name, but its capacity for forgiveness and growth. Lady Millicent, you have exemplified that by restoring your codicil and bestowing your bounty not only upon blood relations, but upon the wider world." Lady Millicent's throat moved as she nodded, unable to speak. Poirot turned to Geraldine. "My dear, your transformation from frightened heiress to confident patroness proves that courage resides within us all, waiting only for the right moment to emerge." Geraldine's cheeks reddened with pleasure. "To Monsieur Corrington," Poirot continued, "I commend your loyalty even when misdirected and your willingness to atone by guiding Lady Millicent's charities. Your station is now firmly one of service, not servitude." Carrington bowed his head in gratitude. "Madame Sterling," Poirot said, eyes resting on the governess, "you taught us that protection must never come at the expense of trust. Your restoration of integrity has inspired not only Lady Millicent, but everyone in this household." Penelope dipped her head, her gentle smile radiant. Finally, he faced Colonel Hastings. "And to you, Hastings, whose steadfast friendship and unerring notes preserve not only facts but the very spirit of our work. Without your devotion, my little grey cells would be mere abstraction." Hastings tapped his notebook. "I am honoured, Poirot." Poirot rose, straightening his cravat. "My friends, I shall always remember Blackwood Manor as more than a case reader, as a living tapestry of human emotion. In its threads I found fear and hope, betrayal and forgiveness, pride and humility." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. He held out a small, velvet-lined box. "One final token," he said softly. Inside gleamed a slender silver pen, engraved with the words to record truth. "In friendship and in justice." He presented it to Hastings. "May this serve you as you continue your chronicles writing, not only what is seen, but what must be remembered." Hastings accepted the gift with a tremor of emotion. "Thank you, Hercule. I shall treasure it always." Poirot stepped back as Lady Millicent rang a small bell. The butler entered, and she instructed him to prepare refreshments for their guest of honour, as the aroma of fresh pastries and coffee filled the air. Poirot surveyed his assembled friends one last time. "Now," he said with a knowing smile, "would anyone care to solve the next mystery, the recipe for Lady Millicent's extraordinary scones?" Laughter rippled through the room, warm and genuine, as each rose to claim a treat. Outside, the world moved briskly toward winter, yet within the walls of Blackwood Manor, the promise of tomorrow sweet, nourishing, and bright spread like sunshine through amber panes. And so, as the little grey cells rested at last, justice, mercy, and friendship sat together at the tea-table, proof that even the deepest mysteries yield their secrets and their blessings to those who pursue truth with both mind and heart.